Good evening, everyone. It's time to call the meeting to order. I would like to thank all those who are present and all those who are tuning in for the October 14th regular board meeting. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Elizabeth, can you call the roll, please?
Mayor Harker.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cooper.
Here.
Commissioner Gilligan.
Here.
Commissioner LaPiccolo.
Here.
Commissioner Oliver.
Here.
Commissioner Spiegler.
Here. Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the items on the agenda?
So moved.
We've got a motion on the floor. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. Now we have items of consent. We have 5 of those. The first one is the meeting minutes from September 9th and the 23rd. We have an event application, Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead Festival. We have number 3, the amendment to the ordinance, Section 7107, parking trailers on public streets that are prohibited. We have the 2025 Board of Commissioner meeting schedule. Hopefully all the commissioners have programmed those dates into their calendar. And number 5, we have a resolution regarding surplus property from the Beaufort Fire Department. Now, although this item is under the item of consent, I don't want the importance of this resolution to be lost. I want to thank our fire department for visioning a way of being able to help the community in western North Carolina that has been devastated by Hurricane Helene. So the resolution would be to support donating a fire engine number 4, which is a 2008 Rosenbauer, and several other items to assist these affected communities. So can I get a motion to approve the items of consent?
So moved that we, item of consent be approved.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to old business. The first one is the food truck ordinance amendment, Chapter 113, itinerant merchants. And Charlie, who do we have on that one?
This
Michelle?
item will be reviewed by our town planner, Michelle Eitner.
Thank you.
Good evening. As discussed at the September 23rd work session, staff has integrated the board's desired changes into Chapter 113 of the town's Code of Ordinances regarding itinerant merchants. Staff provided a list of potential solutions to issues arising from food truck operation at the work session for discussion. As a result of that discussion, we're providing the amended Chapter 113, which is a section of Title 6 Business Regulations of the town's Code of Ordinances. Now, this section is not part of the development ordinances that will be discussed or included in the UDO, as discussed with White and Smith later this evening. Updates have been made to remove outdated provisions that predated our modern zoning and business regulations that were based on old privilege license procedures. Many existing provisions align with the board's current desired policy, but additions were made to better address anticipated impacts of food trucks and similar methods of business. The draft amendments are shown with blue underlines additions and red strike-through deletions. So the next few slides provide the noted changes shown in the memo accompanying the amended text, as well as the pages of the amended text that they refer to. This section carries forward exemptions of produce and seafood stands, yard sales, trade shows. This definition section is updated to include private delivery and catering to the list of exemptions, specifically identifying the exemption for farmers markets as the Old Beaufort Farmers Market, since it seems to be the only one currently, and clarify town-approved special events as exempt, which could include future farmers markets as needed. This allows for town oversight for special events with vendors that would be exempt from the operational standards, allow those vendors to be on public property or rights of way, like the road closure on Mardi Gras, as well as allow for generator use, like at the farmers market. This section aligns with the licensing provisions of the article, which are also proposed to be removed, and I'll identify those in a minute. This section sets out the operational and location standards for itinerant merchants, including food trucks. The prohibition for itinerant merchants to operate on public property or rights-of-way in town is carried forward in this draft. So that's an existing provision. The operational standards with regard to generators, trash, audio amplification, and drive-through service are included, as well as a location standard of 100-foot setback and required parking space use prohibition. So if a parking space is required to meet your zoning, then you can't park the food truck in that space or use an itinerant merchant in that space. You've got to have that space open. Inspections and/or permitting by the fire department and either county health department or state department of agriculture, which is like a restaurant versus a coffee shop, are supported to continue concurrently but separately from these regulations. This section regarding licensing is consistent with the old privilege licenses of Chapter 110 in our code. The itinerant merchant licensing program, which was established in 1985, requires the town clerk and tax collector to provide a sort of temporary privilege license for the itinerant merchant. Now that privilege licenses are not issued by municipalities, this licensing scheme is a bit outdated. Staff that believes that current problems arising from food trucks and other itinerant merchants are an issue of an almost 40-year-old provision that's largely unused, not necessarily a need for new permitting. Updating these provisions to reflect current policy should reduce impacts through education and enforcement. Enforcement is shown in the article proposed to continue to be carried out by the police department, and enforcement penalties are carried forward through Section 1099 of the code, which identifies a couple different methods, including a $500 fine. All said and done, this is what Chapter 113 would look like with the currently proposed additions and deletions made. It's a little easier to see it this way than the red line version. This is just the first draft in our discussion. I'd be happy to hear feedback from the commissioners to identify our next steps.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let's start with Commissioner Spiegler.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you going through that. Do you foresee, I know we talked about a lot of this at our last work session. Do you think this pretty well encompasses what we spoke about last time? Do you see any like conflicts that you think are going to be pretty common with these?
I don't, but I think that the business community may be better able to identify what some of those conflicts might be. Food truck owners, restaurant owners, folks in the community. So I reserve the right to be wrong. I think that this pretty well covers what the commissioners identified in the discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
So the purpose of this round is really to ask questions, not to necessarily talk about what our opinion is. Is that correct?
Well, you want questions and their opinions, don't you?
Yes.
Yes.
You sure?
I may take that back until I hear what you have to say.
On the questions first, Michelle,
Yes, sir.
how, for instance, would I don't know what the proper term is, but we have a number of canteen trucks that go to job sites and serve coffee and juice and sandwiches and in many places. Would this apply to them? And if so, how and where does it say so in the draft?
Okay. If they are serving a private use, like providing catering, they're not necessarily proposing business to the general public. There's a provision of exemption. Any person.
I don't see how a pickup truck with a back on it selling coffee and sandwiches to the public would be exempt. Is it? Are you saying that your interpretation would be to be exempt, or that it would be?
I'm asking a follow-up question to your question. Would it fall under that? Is it providing catering and delivery for a private event?
No.
So it wouldn't be exempt, so it would be subject to these requirements.
Okay. Is there any way of knowing whether sales tax is collected and is reported and is generated to the Beaufort collection of sales taxes?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Mr. Grady, do you know if sales tax on a food truck is attributed to the location of the food truck business address or
That's my question.
where it's being done?
It should be attributed to the point of sale.
I know.
Okay.
How the town can track that, I mean, if the food truck was, say, had a physical address in Morehead City, I really don't know. That's a good question, but probably one for the Department of Revenue.
A couple on the comment side. I understand the breakdown between the exceptions list and the prohibited conduct list, but a couple of minor things on drafting. On the prohibited conduct list under item A, I see little value to have any document requiring notarization. I think that's just a little overreach personally. In general, I think my overall concern on this, despite the good efforts of you and Elizabeth and Rachel and the staff and the mayor's newsletter and whatever, I don't think we've had anywhere close to adequate vetting of this in our community. And I think in this particular case, we should perhaps direct drafts of this for comment and suggestion across the entire community and very directly to the businesses and to the food truck providers and particularly to the BBA. I think I understand your attention, and I commend you for that, but I think we need to go a little more carefully. One of the things that bothers me about this is that one of the prohibitions in here, and particularly it's number, I'll find it here in a minute, I think it's number C, is basically almost exactly the same thing as our current prohibition that we have under 113, and we're not enforcing that.
Right.
It seems just a little incongruous to me that if we're not enforcing something now, why are we redrafting a thing and saying, well, we're gonna now start enforcing it? So I have a little bit of a confidence gap on that, so I think we need to get a lot more input.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner, you finished?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
Okay. Thank you. Are we having a buffer between, because I didn't hear it and I don't know if I've read it, buffer between a brick and mortar and a food truck?
Yes, sir. Subsection H identifies a 100-foot distance between itinerant merchants or between an itinerant merchant and a customer entrance of a restaurant open for business.
I don't have anything right now other than that, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
Thanks for incorporating all of our comments and concerns and recommendations from last time. This is starting to shape up in something that we can begin to wrap our heads around, so thank you for that. I also agree with parts of what Bucky said about maybe soliciting some feedback from the food trucks themselves. They operate in other towns and counties, and it would be interesting to hear like what some of the barriers have been for them, what some of the successes have been. Also figuring out that revenue question, which I really do think it's a point of sale thing, but it would be nice to clarify that and with DOR. Also, maybe specifically solicit a formal set of comments from the BBA. I think that Bucky suggested that as well. I also wanted to ask, and I made this comment last time, and I see it here, so I appreciate that. Make an exception for generators in times of emergency situations. So here it's referred to as following a natural disaster or other emergency situation, the Board of Commissioners may allow that. Now, how does that look? Like if we have a disaster, like how is that exemption implemented quickly?
So you'd really kick over to your emergency management ordinance, and typically once a state of emergency is declared, your mayor can direct that, I want to say unilaterally, because that's what she's entitled to do, with any other restrictions, prohibitions, temporary measures. So I think that would be how you would get to it.
Okay.
You would just tie those two ordinances together, and the mayor would allow it for whatever the temporary time is.
Okay, that's good. That's kind of what I was getting at, to make sure that it was streamlined so we wouldn't have this one thing kind of hanging off to the side that we have to worry about.
Right.
So, okay, that's great. And those are all the comments I have for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lopiccolo.
Thank you, appreciate the presentation. I also had a few questions, and I also agree with Paul and Bucky about trying to make sure that we are incorporating the business owners downtown, or the people who even have food trucks right now in our community, kind of see if any of these rules and regs would be detrimental to things that even currently exist. I had a question regarding the using the terms of, I have no problem with the Beaufort Farmers Market. Love the Beaufort Farmers Market. This is not an attack on the Beaufort Farmers Market in any way, shape, or form. But using that in a town ordinance, citing that name of a specific group or nonprofit group, and deeming that that group has the right or privilege to operate and have these rights and privileges wherever location they may want to go to. I know they've had other areas where they've set up, and that also in some ways prevents other farmers markets or competing farmers markets from, say, developing, or say if there's an art show or art market that may be in town that wants to set up as well as an itinerant merchant. So I think we need to be consistent in the document, that we're not just singling out or allowing special privileges. And so, you know, I even floated the possibility of even permitting for a year's time, maybe allowing that to come before the planning board, so that we can be more specific and get the input of the community as well. Because there may be even other special exceptions that may come about that may feel like are appropriate for the community. I also had a concern about the 100-foot setback and the distance, as it doesn't, you know, it basically says that any location or any business within that location that's a restaurant would preclude a business owner from having that food truck. And I know that would affect one of the in particular food trucks that's currently in use. So maybe adjusting that or looking into front door or front entrance accessibility might be helpful. Can you please review Section I, operate in a parking space which is required by a zoning ordinance? Is that for businesses? Is that for private use? Or what? How would that? Can you give me an example of how that would work?
Yes, so if there's a business and they're providing a food truck, say there's an office and they have a food truck parked in the front of their so it's on private property, and that business has 10 parking spaces, and they're required to have 10 parking spaces. We wouldn't want for a food truck to take up 2 or 3 of the parking spaces and prevent that business from being able to provide the required amount of parking spaces. So it's basically don't take up the space that you need for something else, even though that would be on a temporary basis.
Would that also include, say, private property as well? Like if someone had to have parking space in front of their townhome or duplex and they wanted to have something for a party at their home, it wouldn't allow them to have that there because that was a required parking space?
If they were having something for a private, like a party at their house, and it's not for public business, it would fall under that private catering exemption.
But wouldn't it also be
These
against this particular?
requirements wouldn't apply if it falls under an exemption.
Okay,
Anything that's exempt
would be exempt,
just comes out of all of these requirements.
okay.
And with regard to naming Old Beaufort Farmers Market, we could just say Farmers Market. The idea was to identify recurring events that happen on a, regular basis, annually recurring. That was just the only one that we had specific. We could use some different language there. We could just say Farmers Market. It depends on how much oversight the board wants to have with regard to approving special events that are going to have itinerant merchants.
Currently, the farmer's market, is that an event that's approved by the town?
I think the town,
I
The
don't,
county they allow, the county allows them to use their property. So,
Right.
Right.
yeah.
but it's not a town
No.
joint activity at all or anything like that?
We partner with them and provide some trash pickup, but, of course, we're supportive of the farmer's market, but it's not something that we have dominion over.
right, I don't think
Yeah.
we have any, there's never been an approval of a farmer's market there, because it's on county property.
Correct.
So I
Yeah.
think that, then that would have to be specified.
Yeah, so however we want the language to reflect that exemption.
And currently, the way that it's written, no food truck right now, but the way that this is written would be allowed on public property.
Right, and that was something that we were under the impression that we should carry forward. And obviously, exemptions would be able to be on public right-of-way, like those special events and things like that. So that would be something that, once it's vetted by you guys, they could be on that public property.
Okay. All right, well, like I said, I appreciate it. I think we still have a lot of work to do here to kind of make sure that we're getting this right, and we go slow with this, and, we spend time making sure we're reaching out to all parties involved. Thank you.
Right, Michelle, now, so you received comments from the commissioners, and you have some notes that you've been taking. Our goal here today was just to have a discussion and to kind of give you some guidance as to steps forward from here. Do you have any further comments to offer Michelle as she goes back to the drawing board?
I've got a question. If it weren't a named exception in number 4 for the old market, which we all favor, that would be prohibited, in my reading of it, by the prohibition number C, because it's publicly owned property.
I think that needs to be discussed further.
I agree with that.
Public-owned property, so are we deciding county-owned property, state-owned property, or are we just identifying town-owned property?
That's the question.
Okay.
It says publicly owned. That's publicly owned. County
Which
property is
direction?
publicly owned.
Which direction would you like to go in?
I can't hear you.
Which direction would you like to go in? Just town-owned property?
No, I just think it's a question
Okay.
that it's an ambiguity in this draft. And I think that's, and again, I know you'd like to have thing, but we have consensus requirements here.
Yes.
And again, I don't know, I think the publicly owned is probably correct, but that would require a decision by all of us, not just one.
And it's the old language carried forward, so it's just what was there in
Oh,
85.
I see your problems.
He's supposed to have
That's
some
why you're so
solutions.
valuable to us.
Yeah. So as we are going back and forth with this, I guess we'll put you back on the agenda when you have contacted food truck operators, the BBA. I hope that we are taking a look at food truck operations throughout the whole entire town, not just the downtown area, because we don't want to have, restrictions and people feel it's just downtown. What they'll wind up doing is migrating uptown, so then you'll have another problem to fish out. But can you remind us where we stand today before all of this, as we begin to flesh out some of that? If a food truck comes into the town today, where do we stand today? Because we have not made any changes to the ordinance. our
We
current
haven't made
ordinance.
any changes to the ordinance. I think we may be in a sort of gray area as we haven't been enforcing this section.
Okay.
And it's the only section that we have that identifies itinerant merchants like food trucks. So I don't know where that leaves us.
I mean, the problem, Mayor, is you do have the current ordinance on the books.
Right.
So if you say law enforcement asks somebody for their permit, and they say, well, I don't know anything about it, and then they show up the next day to get a permit, we're just not set up to process it. So you could probably work around that, but I think it would be very cumbersome for the town administratively to try to enforce what's on the books, so.
Okay,
Mayor,
yes.
I also, in the outreach effort, I think you should reach out to all restaurants and food establishments. This is coming right at they're the ones that are affected. And I think in this case, no disrespect to our efforts with the website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I don't think people know a damn thing about this. And I'm sorry we don't, but I just don't think we do. So I think we have to go in outreach on this particular thing and seek input. I don't care if we have to do a study or we have to do a survey or what we have to do, but I think we need some definitive outreach on this subject.
And figure out some of the overlaps and guidance, because I saw a food truck on public property, I guess it's private property, next to a restaurant, although that restaurant wasn't open at the time. Then, what is the recourse for the person who has a restaurant and an unassociated food truck, although it's on private property? I mean, there's just a lot of back and forth and nuances to kind of check out. But unless anybody has any further comments for Michelle on this topic? All right. Michelle, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to the updated revision. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the amendment of ordinance to include section 90.12, living or sleeping on streets, highways, or town properties prohibited. Thank you, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor, Board. Just to recap, a few months ago, then Town Manager Clark was given an issue by some citizens about the instances of people living in their vehicles. He charged me with looking into ordinances, and drafting up a potential ordinance that would address this issue. When it was addressed or issued to you last week, there were some questions about the language. We had follow-up discussions with the town attorney, and it was, at the end of that discussion, it was determined that they were comfortable with the language as it was originally written, and that's the language that you have before you for future discussion.
Okay. All righty, let's see if the commissioners have any questions for you. Okay, Chief?
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to start with Commissioner Spiegler.
Thank you. So this was another thing that we discussed at our last work session. I do remember there was some comments about sort of enforcement and also other avenues for providing aid and resources as needed. I know we sort of discussed that last time. Are there any
Yes, ma'am.
updates to that, or do we think we should adopt this now and then sort of work towards that as well?
I don't think I understand the first part of your question. We did discuss that there are resources. Again, just to broadly highlight, this isn't an attempt to, criminalize potential homelessness. This is to address a specific issue with people living and sleeping in their vehicles, regardless of the circumstances.
Right.
And the regional resources that we have are still in place, and my staff are well versed in pointing folks in the right direction depending upon the circumstances that they come across.
So, yeah, just to kind of recap for everybody here, since I know at the work session we didn't have this audience, I just wanted to bring that up again.
Oh,
that-
yes, ma'am.
Yes, so sorry, I didn't really phrase that very well, but I just wanted to make a point that this is not to criminalize homelessness and that there are these resources available.
Correct, and to highlight that in the discussions in drafting and creating this draft, the penalty phase specifically omits any criminal enforcement for it. It's purely a civil citation.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
I guess the only question I have about this, and it almost comes to this point, but what is the, from your standpoint and from a town standpoint, where does the burden lie to have what I'll simply call no trespassing signs in order to make some of this effective?
That, it lies with the board. It's really dependent upon how you want the, I guess for lack of a better term, the facade of Beaufort to look. There's been discussions in the past about signage. There's too much signage, there's not enough signage. And how do we, address that? For instance, that we do have no overnight parking is an ordinance, but it's only enforceable if there's signage. And the follow-up to that is every place you don't want overnight parking, that's just more signs and more signs. So the flavor of what that looks like is really dependent upon the board on how we proceed, whether this is the vehicle for it, pardon the pun, whether it's through this actual ordinance or if it's through, signage through the existing ordinance.
I guess just to dig at it a little bit deeper, I've been told from time to time, I don't know whether I'm correct or not, but that for me really to effectively prohibit any type of occupancy of something, the only way I can really do that effectively is first to post a no trespassing sign. Is that true? Where does it start and where does it stop?
For trespass, yes. Generally, the owner has to be very explicit. You are trespassing, you have to leave. It can be achieved through a sign.
Just to dig on that, but if there's no sign, it's difficult to enforce. Is that true?
Correct, and I'll defer to the chief, but in my experience, when you call law enforcement in that situation, they will say, okay, we got to put them on very specific notice. And whether that's notifying the person at issue in that instance or signage, I mean, it's a notice thing. I think I read this particular ordinance. This is not a no trespassing. It's a no camping.
Right.
So it's subtly different. I think I remember a case from back in the spring. Somebody was set up in Graydon Paul Park for a couple of nights, and I think that's what occasioned your previous town manager to move forward on this.
So my question then, driving it to this, is if there's no sign there, is it enforceable?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. It's since it's not trespassing.
But do you have to have a sign that says no overnight camping in order to affect it?
I don't think so, but, you also get into the enforcement side. I know law enforcement will attempt to get voluntary compliance,
Yes.
give verbal warnings. Hey,
Gotcha.
I'll be back in 2 hours. I hope you're gone by then. That type of interaction. But I think, yes, it is enforceable if you have to without signage.
That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
Thank you, Chief. Several questions here. I see nothing in terms of time, so are we specifically just talking about dust? Or we're also talking about even if the sun is up, is there I don't see it in terms of time on here. Because I see people sleeping out on benches in several businesses, and so that's why I'm wondering about the time frame of this.
Right. Well, this ordinance is 24/7, and it's for town-owned property. That's the property that this is.
Town-owned property?
Yes.
So someone outside of say the Roses complex, sleeping on that bench, we're not able to enforce that, or we can just ask them to move along?
That would be up to the property owner, and we had such instances today, as a matter of fact, twice, where the actual owner of Beaufort Square called us for issues that they're having. And that's what, engages my staff with the enforcement.
All right. And I see we have a penalty in the amount of $250. If that person is homeless, how are we going to collect?
I can't answer that. And the dollar amount that's assessed is up to, the language is up to the board. There's some language in ordinances that says a fine up to $500. It could be $50, could be $250. So the actual enforcement piece or the collection piece, that's a decision that the board can make. This is just the initial draft of the ordinance.
Okay. So if they're on city property, and we ask them, your officers ask them to move, are they giving them 1 or 2 chances on that? Because maybe they might come back the next day?
Yeah, our interactions are still rooted in education over enforcement, and generally speaking, people that we come in contact with comply. And we're very understanding, and we have, with what conditions that we're faced with, and every instance is its own set of circumstances. There's no boilerplate response. I was talking with the town attorney, and we used the premise of discretion. And I'll use, not to oversimplify it, but I'll use speeding as an example. The speed limit's 25 miles per hour. Can you be written a citation for 26 and a 25? Absolutely. Will you? Most likely not. But, you know, there comes a point where there has to be parameters written in the ordinance.
Okay. And I know we have no shelters in Beaufort, period. And I know Moorhead is very limited on their shelter. So, you know, what information is given to them, you know, to a homeless person, that the officer can provide to say, well, you can go here, here, or here? Because, like I said, I know both, we have no shelters. And Moorhead, I'm not quite sure if they really have shelters for the homeless.
Right. And depending upon the circumstances that we find, some will qualify to go into shelters and some will not, dependent upon their physical state. There's also churches that we can reach out to. You know, there's several avenues for my staff to reach out to, depending upon the circumstances that they come across. But I think it's important to highlight that the goal of this is not to identify to address homelessness, but we're not naive to think that we're not going to come in contact with that. But again, every individual situations and circumstances are different, and that's really going to dictate which direction that we're able to send them.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Gilligan?
Since we're focused on educating people and using discretion, can we consider the language for the fine to be up to $250 rather than $250, period? That would be my only ask for this. Otherwise, I think it looks
But you said it could go beyond 250. Well, didn't you say that, Chief?
Well,
Or
I
is
think
it
he was
bottom
giving
line
examples.
250? Oh,
Well, it's up to your discretion. It's up to the
This
board's,
draft says just $250.
just two.
whatever the pleasure of the board is.
So up to 250 would be a suggestion
Yes.
for this board. Okay. Any further comments? Oh, no? Okay. Commissioner Lopiccolo?
Yeah, thank you for coming, I appreciate it. I know this ordinance came about really not about homelessness. And I know the town police has done a very good job with some issues of homelessness downtown, working with the homeless to try to
Yes,
get them placed and so forth, and I've had firsthand knowledge and information about that. But this was really more about garbage, RVs pulling up and setting up for weeks on end.
Yes, sir.
On Turner Street, I've seen it happen there. I've seen it happen on Front Street in various parking places on Front Street, and basically using downtown Beaufort parking spaces as an RV park. And so the ordinance is not, from what I understand, is really not about trying to move homeless people out or people who have had a bad night, or if there's been domestic violence and someone needs, a place to sleep in their vehicle. Obviously, it does cover that, but I would imagine the police department's going to basically be sensitive to those types of situations.
Yes, sir.
But have the ability with this ordinance to enforce the times where people are coming into our town and using it as a spot to spend the week, basically on the waterfront. We do have other locations that are county-owned property that people can be, so the courthouse is there. We have the end of Cedar Street. We have other locations that are not within the town that this does not fall under. So we do have other avenues in our community, but it does help to make sure that the streets are clean and they're just not being used for long-term RV parking. And to me, that's really what this ordinance is about. So I don't have a problem with the 250. I think it has to have some teeth to it. And I think there has to be discretion with the police department, and I do hope and trust that they use that discretion.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any further questions for Chief Burdette? Okay, thank you, Chief.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
We do have a suggestion about the fines being up to $250 as an amendment to this ordinance that's being presented. And what is the pleasure of the board?
Mayor, can I
Yes.
interject? I appreciate the up to 250. That leaves a lot of gray area for your responding law enforcement officer.
Okay,
I would suggest that you pick a number, even if it's a lower number, so that, you know, the officer's not in the world of, am I writing a ticket for $25 or $125?
so any kind of suggestions, 25 and up, or 50 and up, is what we're saying? Or 50 up to 250?
It's really in the board's discretion. I think you just need to pick a number of 250s on the high side. I mean,
Okay,
50 is a pretty common number for things like this. I think realistically, I mean, most of the time law enforcement's educational and voluntary compliance efforts work. I think there's a small chance that we'll actually be over in court trying to collect a fee. It's more of a deterrent effect, so.
so what about repeat offenders, people that you find that either you've spoken to before about this situation?
Each instance is a separate offense.
Okay.
So if you've got a person that violates the ordinance tonight at Town Hall, and then they violate the ordinance tomorrow night at Great Hall Park, I mean, that's a separate citation. So, if you had to go there, you could, you know, move somebody along, I guess, and really have some good teeth behind it.
Okay. All right, so when the board is looking at this, what kind of, yes, John?
I would also argue that someone with an RV would pay $25 to spend the night on Front Street. And you could set up an RV park all week.
Okay.
So I would be careful with a low fine for that. That's my opinion.
Okay. Any other board members have any concerns about the fine or suggestions? Commissioner Spiegler?
I would be fine changing it. I hear your point. I think we should pick a number and not have a range.
Do you have a number in mind that you would like to suggest to the board?
I mean, I think somewhere in the middle of what we're talking, somewhere between 50 and 250, right?
Commissioner Oliver?
I'll follow the consensus of the board.
All right. Commissioner Cooper?
I hear what Commissioner LaPiccolo is saying in terms of, and I'm not sure, because I don't see him, but, you know, he's out running at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'm sure he's more, the visibility of these vehicles is plainly for him. $25, it may be low. I could see 100.
Commissioner Gilligan, you stuck at 250?
I guess I would like to understand what our kind of average fine for this level of offense is.
I think it's new
Or if there is one,
territory.
or is it all over the place?
I think that's new territory for us in terms of.
Chief, do you have an idea of what an average fine would be for something like that?
I can't give you an average, but I can tell you in our navigable waters ordinance, it's $500 per offense. And the town attorney and I felt that that was a bit too high, and she's the one that actually recommended the 250, kind of split it in the middle. Again, like Commissioner Piccolo said, to give it some teeth, but not to be overly offensive.
Well, then I'll just back off my suggestion and then just use discretion and education. I was just thinking of the up to 250 to deal with repeat people that had mental health issues or homelessness issues, but if 250 is what we have in other places or similar, then I could be okay with it.
So that's what's in this current ordinance is 250, so we'll stick with that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. 250, shaking of the heads, consensus? All righty, so now you get an opportunity to either approve this ordinance or make any other suggestions or not approve it. So what's the pleasure of the board?
Mayor, I like to propose that we move forward and approve this ordinance as written for section 90.12, living and sleeping on the streets, highways, or town property.
Okay. And the fine being 250,
And, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, as written,
as written.
as written.
All righty. Any further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to public comment. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment today?
Susan Schmidt.
Ah, Susan.
Susan Schmidt, 1527 Ann Street. I have several different topics. The first is, I request, I think I emailed you, paint orange diagonal lines on crosswalk lumps on Front Street in front of the Maritime Museum, Turner Street in front of BHA, Yopon Street by the playground. Number two, I've paid property taxes 43 years. I request free parking for locals on weekdays after Labor Day, better all year. Look at the empty lots. I'm not shopping downtown. And then comments on the UDO. I'm sorry, page 55, that short-term rentals are not expected to change. I'd like more control on short-term rentals. Good in the UDO, plant natives, control pesticides, enhance dark sky, control drainage of fill on adjacent lots, support bikes and pedestrians, and the planning board can request an EIS.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Look at that.
That's it? Okay, that's the end of public comment. Now we're going to move on to new business. The first one is the draft UDO code assessment discussion. And Michelle and,
Yes.
okay.
Good evening, Board. We're very excited to have our consultants back with us tonight, and I won't keep you very long. I'll hand over everything to them. But I know that you've had a number of days to review this document, so I'm excited to get to go through it with you. Tyson and Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. Tyson Smith with White and Smith Planning and Law Group. Good to be back with you. Let's see. Please, yes. And Ms. Lewis, are you able to go back and forth if we need to a little bit? We'll give you plenty of time. Also with me, you'll recall Kelly Cousineau from our firm. We're going to walk you through the public review draft of the codes assessment. Tonight, receive your input on this. Let's see, am I controlling here? Yeah. So first of all, I'll review the scope of work for this project and how it relates to phase two. We'll go through the codes assessment, as I said, and then we'll talk about next steps. We're in phase one of the codes assessment now. You recall that from our initial meetings. So we're not actually, for the public's benefit, not actually drafting the UDO in this phase, but talking about and identifying what it is that we'll address during the UDO process. So in June, we had our kickoff. You'll remember we met with you, we met with the planning board, with UDO steering committee, and we had a community conversation as well. And then we had an initial draft prepared of the assessment about the August timeframe, vetted that with staff, got comments back, and produced the draft that you have before you now last month. In phase two, we'll talk just a little bit on that tonight, mainly a few things, how to transition into phase two, how this work relates to it, but also importantly, the public input component of that process when we get to it, and also the drafting process and some time expectations and that sort of thing. Kelly will touch on that. You'll see that the assessment is broken into modules or aligns with modules that would be in the actual UDO, and we'll give you more on that when Kelly gets up and talk about how that will work. So the primary objectives of this phase, as I said, are to identify the subject matters to be addressed, and where we can to summarize the scope of the revisions as you see them in phase two. So there'll be some topics, as you've seen in the assessment, where we say, this topic will be addressed. There are other ones where it says, this topic will be addressed, and this was the input or the leaning that we heard during our public outreach. And there might be topics that we say, we understand that this topic does not need to be addressed. So that's kind of the concept here and what we're making our way through. Where there are particular tools that are identified or that you already know you want to explore, they've been identified as well, and that helps us develop the scope of work for you in an accurate way. Following these meetings, this meeting tonight, we'll be back here November 14th, I think. We'll be back for your November meeting. And we'll have a drafting schedule at that point, and we'll have fleshed out or gotten any feedback on what you certainly want to see as part of the public outreach process during the drafting stage. As you've seen, the subject matter or the concepts in the assessment are addressed by or organized by subject matter. As I said, we've done 2 of the 3 drafts. We'll come back in November with the final draft of the assessment. What we're going to do tonight is go through each section, just introduce the section, and if it's still a good way to go, we'll then go down and let each of you give us your input on each section, and then we'll move on to the next. And if you don't have comments on a section, that's perfectly okay. You can certainly pass. So these are the 12 topics that are covered. The first 2 are somewhat introductory. The last 2, as I said, relate mostly to phase 2. But the 9 sections between that are the ones that we'll spend most of our time on tonight. Can we switch over to the study itself? And if you would, go down to section 2. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, that'll do. Yep, one more page up. Okay, very good. Thank you. There's several sections in this section of the assessment. This is an area where we wanted to address some of the context that we heard was important during our time with you in June. One was making sure that historically underrepresented and socially vulnerable communities were recognized during the UDO. That could have a couple of components. It could just be the process, number one, to make sure we're, in our outreach, we're reaching all the groups and we're meeting them on their terms and where they're comfortable, et cetera. We talked about the farmers market, but we also talked about churches and community gathering places in different communities. But it could also relate to how the UDO is actually drafted substantively. So we'll be aware of how standards would impact different communities differently and be cognizant of that and maybe make adjustments as we go along. Second part of this one is growth trends in public facility capacity. This is an area where we have a couple of things we want to make sure we cover with you, and they're in the footnotes on page 6 and on page 7. The first reflects a comment we heard that it's important that the vision of the town be, in terms of a plan for growth and a vision for growth, be clearly articulated at the front end of the UDO. There are a few ways to do that. Of course, you could go through and produce go through a separate process where that's articulated. One observation I have is that you have a lot of plans that articulate that vision, and you've just finished the CAMA plan and Resilient Beaufort. One thought we had was to start off the process with an articulation of the vision. You've all seen vision statements. You know how they work, and they're about this long or so. And then a listing of the goals you want to accomplish in the UDO. And we can include that easily at the front end, and then that way, that would be a reference point as we go through the UDO process when there are judgment calls to make or, conflicting views that go back to that vision and that goal articulation. So that would be something I'd like to stop and maybe get input on from the board, is what are your expectations in terms of summarizing your vision as we get into the UDO process?
Okay, and we're going to go down the line, so I just want to kind of let all the board members know that we have spoken about a little strategy today as far as how we're going to go through this document. So he's going to go through the sections. This will allow for the citizens to stay on top of what's going on as well, and then he's going to ask us for our comments on each section. So it may be a little bit belabored, but allows for, I think, our citizens to remain still intact with the conversation. So we're going to go down the line. We're going to start with Commissioner Spiegler.
Thank you. Just so I understand, are we going to go back to the first section and then the second? What do you want comments on right now?
Yeah.
Well, the question now is, when you think about a clear articulation of the town's vision for growth, it obviously is a product of a number of other documents. Do you feel like there needs to be a separate task where that is reviewed and revisited, or would it be effective and sufficient to identify a vision statement that we can help you generate and a list of goals for the UDO that each of you can give your input on to reflect all the plans that are already out there?
So almost like having an executive summary at the beginning? Is that
I
what
think
you're
so, at the beginning of the
asking?
process,
Yeah.
right? And that would be a guiding tool.
Okay. I think that would be good. I think a lot of times people will not read this whole document, and so I think having a really clear articulation at the beginning would be helpful for us as a board, but also for anybody who picks up that document.
Okay.
Just not, because I'm assuming this is going to be, how many pages are we at already?
Oh, the
Over
UDO
20.
ones were, the UDO document?
Yes.
Oh, I wouldn't guess.
So I think it would be useful to have, so we're talking about right now what we want to see in the UDO document, not the codes assessment report that you're.
Correct.
Okay, now I understand. So we're going to get back to all of these sections.
Yes.
Okay, so yes, I think absolutely for the final UDO, right? I think it would be great to have that section in the beginning. I also, another discussion point, and I would actually like to have your input as well. We received the RCCP grant, Resilient Coastal Communities grant from Division of Coastal Management, and that is a $100,000 grant to incorporate resilience into our UDO updates. So I think that's something for us to think about. Do we have a section in the, whatever we're going to call it, executive summary as well, that lays out how we're going to meet those goals of the grant that we received, which I think would be a good idea, and then maybe note how we are incorporating that throughout the plan as well. So I think that could be a good place for that as well.
Okay.
So those are my comments, and I'm going to hold my comments for the specific sections of the code. Okay.
Yeah, we'll go up section by section, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
I have no comments at this point.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
I'll hold off.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
I agree with Commissioner Spiegler's comments. I can't see that we're going to undertake a concurrent strategic growth planning process because of some other big-ticket items we have on our plates right now, but I see that it kind of looks like what we're planning here is like a mini strategic growth plan exercise within this plan. So I definitely think we should continue in that direction and making it clear from the very beginning. I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopiccolo?
Yeah, I think having a statement up front to have us all be able to comment on so that we know what the strategic plan is for the community would be best. And I think, I would imagine you'd base that on your interactions already with the
Yes.
community and the planning board and the board of commissioners and the interviews that you've had with the community to be able to start writing that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what we would do is propose language to you and help you work with it to finalize it. That would guide your work, that would guide the work of the planning board, give the community clear understanding, I think, of how you'll be making policy decisions.
That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to move on to the next section.
Sure,
Okay.
let's do that. Next page, please. There's a second footnote here. This is a bit more complex. I wanted to touch on it, though, early on. What we heard frequently during our outreach process in June was a concern that the capacity of public facilities, public improvements, keep up with growth. Or flipping that growth go at a pace that you can keep up with your public facility capacity. So this is a concept in planning called concurrency or adequate public facility programming. And I think the question, again, we're going to the scope of work for the second phase. To what degree do we want to explore testing capacity of our public facilities as new development is approved? So for example, a new development comes in, it's going to have an impact on, and I'll just pick one, law enforcement services. We can measure that impact. We know what impact that has per equivalent dwelling unit, so that would be evaluated when a new subdivision or new planned development comes in, that sort of thing. Same thing can be put into place or looked at for parks, can be looked at for libraries, can be looked at for, fire and EMS, et cetera. This is looked at informally all the time. I'm sure this is a topic at many of your meetings, same with the planning board. What we're asking, I think, here is, do you want the scope to include a more formalized look at these capacities? It might say, for example, there's a level of service identified that for every new household, such amount of an acre of park is required to serve that household, and sort of testing at that more precise level. And I'll stop with that, and there are a couple other topics I want to get to on this footnote, but.
All righty. Commissioner Spiegler?
So are you wanting us to provide feedback?
I think it would be important if you would identify what the facilities are that you believe should be deemed adequate when new growth is proposed. Or conversely, where new growth shouldn't go forward or new approval shouldn't be made if that capacity is not available. Sewer is an obvious one. That's very clear. Sewer and water you deal with all the time. Are there any others that you feel are critical that need to be maintained at a level of service before new growth is approved?
Okay, so already assuming wastewater treatment plant and water plant are on the list.
Yep.
Okay. I do think we need to prioritize our green space and our pervious pavement, and really think about areas for stormwater management as we increase in development.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
I think that's the core purpose of the UDO.
Okay.
So to me, it's a self-answering question. Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
I agree with Commissioner Piccolo in terms of stormwater, and also maybe looking at expanding our park and rec services. We have one particular area, but further north, I don't think we provide that much services for our citizens.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
I'll ditto Commissioner Spiegler, plus Commissioner Cooper's comment about parks, which can also be green space.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Lil Piccolo?
Same, I think we're all in consensus. I think the UDO really, that's the primary purpose, is to identify how we can make sure we're growing in a way that we're not overstepping our bounds, that we have enough enough people in the fire department, we have enough services for the police department, we also have enough green space. And I'm commenting on some other parts, but it was good to see that we're lifting even the cap on the amount for the green space or parks when new developments come in. So I think we really do need to prioritize so that the current residents are not negatively impacted, but are benefiting as well as the town does slowly and grow.
Okay.
I'm assuming yes to testing capacity.
Yes,
Yes,
that
okay.
was helpful. That was very
Okay,
clear. I
very good.
appreciate that, and that'll sort of lead into these other two topics. The first is a fee in lieu. That's not something that we would normally Well, fee in lieu, let me talk about what that is first. This is a typical tool that you'll see with park dedications or park requirements, for example. So it's very common, for example, to say that when a new subdivision comes in or a new development, it has to provide a park, has to provide the land. It may have to improve that property of a certain amount, and that's usually tied to the number of units that'll be in the subdivision, hopefully. Some communities use a fee in lieu. That is to say that if you don't want to dedicate the land or can't dedicate the land because of configurations or other on-site constraints, you can pay a fee in lieu of that dedication. And that fee in lieu is easily calculated based on the cost of your land and park improvements already. If you want to explore things like that, we can look at that as part of the UDO. And I wanted some feedback on that. I know that the fee in lieu concept did come up in some of the comments we got before.
Okay. So you want input on fee in lieu of services?
Correct,
Okay.
yep.
Commissioner Spiegler?
Can you educate me about what we currently have in our ordinances? Maybe Michelle can.
What's that? A rec fee? And what does that cover?
Recreation and park and recreation
But
fees.
there's a cap on that, is that correct, or no?
10,000, and that's for your standard park requirement? Okay.
So
Well,
I
you may-
think we have discussed as a board before removing that cap, right? And I would definitely support that.
Okay, that's probably what we heard then. Okay.
Okay. You good? Commissioner Cooper?
Good.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
Yeah, let's keep it.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopicolo?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, very good. And then finally, a reference there to capacity allocation. Sewer capacity now is allocated according to your allocation plan. You've got 3 or 4 priority areas that you follow. Again, along the lines of the concept that we take capacity we do have and we prioritize either preferred development types or land use types or other geographic areas. Is there anything about the sewer capacity allocation system that you think is worth looking at when it comes to land uses that you prefer or areas that you prefer get available allocation for treatment of sewer capacity? Right now, for example, priority 1 is generally in the town limits, priority 2 is in the ETJ, 3 is proposed annexations. Do you want to try to build into the UDO something that might say workforce housing or something as a priority, or that gives you guidance within those other prioritized areas, or that the NIZ is an area we don't want to be allocating sewer capacity?
Okay. All right. Thank you. Commissioner Spiegler?
Well, I think this gets back also to our incorporating the resilience components into really throughout the entire plan. So like, for example, what you just said, we want to make sure we're not putting our critical assets in the way of hazards like flooding. So that's going to be critical as we go through this UDO. And I think that by looking at the CAMA land use plan, we can sort of identify those areas and make sure that we are updating, the ordinances to reflect that. I'm not sure if I really answered your question or not.
You did. So
Okay.
this would be giving you guidance when you're presented a proposal and a request for sewer allocation, that these types of criteria might start informing you in a formal way.
Yes, and I think
Decision
we
making.
sort of do that already as commissioners, but we don't really, we can suggest it right now, but we can't require it, and I think we would like to be able to require
That's
that.
it. That's it. Okay.
Commissioner Oliver?
I can spend hours on this, but I'll start with a sewer comment. It's my firm belief that we don't have a sewer capacity problem. We have a very bad I&I problem.
That's right. I remember.
And I would like to get input directly from you as to what you find across communities between the relationship of water capacity production versus sewer capacity production. Because a study that I've done pretty well confirms the point to me that we don't have a capacity problem. What we have is an I&I problem. So when you get into this, if that in fact becomes consensus of this board, then the question is our growth has to be controlled not by sewer capacity, but by our spending the money to fix our I&I problem.
There's not much I could add to that.
So I'd be very interested in data that you have for other communities between the relationship of water production and sewer capacity.
Sure. Communities that have I&I problems are treating more water than they need to treat. That still is the capacity of the facility. So if you're putting in place a capital improvement plan or funding to fix that, your capacity gets freed up.
$30 million worth right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to see if we can get that, we can prove out that theory and see if there is in fact consensus on that through some of your educational from other communities,
Okay.
which is right up your alley.
Sure.
Thank you.
Very good. Sure.
Commissioner Cooper?
I go with Commissioner Oliver on that.
Commissioner Gilligan?
I think whether or not we have an I&I problem, which I know we do, but whatever the status is of it, I still think we need to prioritize capacity and prioritize geographic areas or other topics with reservations.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, when you talked about the framework, this is just framework for saying what capacity be given for one location over another based on, and we all have kind of agreed, like the Commissioner Spiegel has said, based on location, and whether or not that area is a high intensification zone or so forth, or out of town. Are you talking about making that a framework that is in stone that we're following, or something that we can still be able to say, well,
Can you lean into the mic, John, a little bit?
we do need, workforce housing, and we do feel like that's more important for this location. So is it more of a framework, or is it more of a guideline that we?
Well, the answer is it could be either, depending on what the board wants to do. My sense is it would be more guideline. These would be the criteria, these would be your guidelines, but now they would be articulated more clearly. But that's something we can take up as we go along. As we go along, it may be that you want to put something in stone, and then you want to have some discretion, some flexibility in other areas. But if that's something you want us to spend some time on, that's what we'll make sure we scope out.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Now, it's mentioned further into the document about workforce and affordable housing. I guess that will kind of piggyback into capacity as well. So I just
It
wanted to
could.
kind of mention that. I'm assuming that it will somehow bounce back forward, and capacity would have a role in that.
That's right.
Okay, all right. But I just want to mention workforce housing and affordable housing is important. Okay.
Okay, very good, thank you. And then finally, in this section, of course, something that's always the case, but wanting to mention explicitly that we're always balancing the public interest and the private interest, and that will be common thread throughout, the development of the UDO when there are factors to balance into weigh. I am going to have Kelly come up and start section 3. Do we need to go back to the introductory section?
Anybody
Commissioners?
like to see the introduction part?
I just had a quick comment.
Sure.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to both of y'all. I know you came a couple months ago, got a lot of really good input, so I just want to say I really think this is a good start. So just take my comments with that in mind. I do think in the introduction, I know you talk about the Resilient Beaufort Plan later, but I do think it should be right up there in the introduction, since that is the grant that is paying for this. So that was going to be my comment on that. And then I just had a quick comment on the second section as well.
Oh, sure.
It's okay to add that.
Of course.
I think that I had 2 comments about that. When we're looking at equity and balance, I would like to see a statement in that section about the importance of so you just got into we're going to try to balance between public and private interests. And I think it's important to note, especially for the public benefits, right, that we're talking about environmental, economic, and social benefits, and that we're going to try to balance all 3 of those, and that one is not necessarily more important than the other. And I think that comes out of our CAMA land use plan too, but I think it would be important to note that, right up front. And then the only other thing I wanted to talk about for equity and balance, I do think, and it gets this comment kind of comes in later too, I think there needs to be, we live in Beaufort. A lot of what is so special about Beaufort is because of our environment and our coastal resources here. So I think when we're talking about equity and balance, we need to recognize environmental protection right up front too. So I was going to suggest adding a section in this second section about the importance of environmental protection, And also, I really want to highlight that we need to plan for future conditions, not just present conditions, because we have seen what just happened out west. It's been horrible, and we know that a lot of the conditions we're planning for presently are not adequate anymore, and we know a lot of the FEMA floodplain maps are outdated. And so if we just continue to look at what's going on right now, I think we're going to put a lot of our critical assets at risk. And so I do think it's important when we're talking about the planning process, that we need to recognize that too. So those are my 2 comments for that section.
Okay, very good.
I also had a comment too. I think that's also really important. I think going back to the private property rights and the public interest, just balancing and making sure that we're reaching out to all parties involved. We have, as a board, obviously we all have the final say in what's going on, but I think we do need to reach out to the builders in our community or even developers and have them be a part of this, because we may be changing some rules and regs of freeboard and so forth, and not really maybe understanding how that may affect the cost of building workforce housing and so forth. So I think it's important that we do reach out and we all are at the table, because we don't want to write this document and then have it so that now we basically have priced out even building something of that nature, or a single-family home, or workforce housing and so forth. So I think we need to have all players contacted as we're going through this process.
Okay, that's a good point.
I would second Commissioner LaPiccolo. I think it's really important to have that group at the table during this process.
Great, we'll add that. That's a great point.
And I'd add one more thing to 2.4 in the property rights thing, and that's addressing appropriate mitigations, efforts that can be made when you run into those problems.
Anything, a particular example come to mind, or any other?
Stormwater,
Okay. So that the affected property owner has some alternatives to comply so that they can move forward, that kind of,
yes, sir.
they don't get held up? Okay.
I'd glad to show you some receipts for mitigations that have been very effective.
Okay, I think I saw some of those, that's right. Okay, very good.
Okay. Also, when you are looking in the lens of environmental protections, I would like for you to look at that as an environmental justice issue as well. We don't want to be able to build areas up and have marginalized communities live there because nobody else wants to.
That's right.
So I want to be able to be fair in that process.
Okay, make a particular mention of that. Anything else on sections 1 or 2? Okay,
You only got 11 more to go.
that's right.
Very good.
Buckle in. Okay.
You buckle in. We're good at this.
Good evening, Commissioners. Kelly Kuzno with White and Smith. I'm going to start with Section 3, which is resiliency in the non-intensification zone. This focuses mainly on the first topics that we're going to take up as part of the grant funding that you all received, primarily looking at impervious surface coverage, low-impact development, incentives and/or standards, stormwater retrofit requirements, any standards or potential zoning districts related to the NIZ, increased construction standards, and shoreline management standards. So happy to take any comments or questions that y'all have on this section.
Commissioner Spiegler?
Yes. So you kind of heard some of my comments about this already. So I'll just pull out a couple more. For the shoreline management ordinances, I think you called out living shorelines, which is great, encouraging living shorelines. I would also suggest to broaden that to natural and nature-based features. So living shorelines could be considered a type of green infrastructure or natural nature-based features. So just making sure we're thinking broadly, living shorelines and other nature-based features. The item on page 8, part C, about construction in the non-intensification zone, I would broaden that to say that any construction needs to require conditions for hazard mitigation and resilient design I think maybe there was a call out of certain types of construction, but I would say all have to have things like the state's 8-foot freeboard, fortified roof construction, impervious pavement, generators, et cetera. So just broadening that. And then also on page 8, part D, so that is about reducing the structure height in the non-intensification zone. And I would say that just reducing the height is not going to address the issue of flood resilience. I think, again, we need to think about nature-based solutions, nature-based features. How can we help that area become more flood resilient? So, thinking about how do we measure from the height to the top of the structure? How can we accommodate, better flood proofing in that area? I have these all typed out too, so don't feel like you have to write everything down.
No, we saw this. Michelle provided a copy, so we appreciate that.
So then, next comment, still on page 8, part E, I think that one is about freeboard, and I think y'all recommended 1 foot of additional freeboard for a total of 2 foot in the floodplains. But if you look at our Campbell Land Use Plan update, we called for 4 foot of freeboard in the floodplains. And there is a new state policy for freeboard as well. So I think just going back and looking at those are really important, making sure we're taking the guidance from the Campbell Land Use Plan and transferring it to these ordinances. And I'll just put in another plug. There is a lot of really great resources in this, both locally here. We have a lot of really great, as you know, very good resources in our town. We also have really good resources at the state. We have the North Carolina Resilience Exchange and the North Carolina Green Growth Toolbox. In addition, obviously, to our Campbell Land Use Plan that has a lot of this really great guidance as well. I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
I think the biggest thing, again,
Can you lean into your mic, please?
I think the biggest thing, thank you, the biggest question I've had in looking at this overall, again, comes back to in these areas, making sure we address and understand what mitigations are encouraged and required and allowed.
Okay.
Again, it comes down to a property right issue.
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor.
Commissioner Cooper?
Yeah, I'd just like to see, some stronger language in terms of stormwater, making sure that we protect our waterways and whatever runoff comes from development. We need to make sure that the developer himself or the homeowner knows that stormwater is an issue. And like Commissioner Spiegel was speaking of, there are a lot of various organizations around Duke Lab, et cetera, that are doing a lot of work, especially along the line in terms of coastal seagrass and et cetera. So if we can expand and make sure that we're in line with those developments.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Spiegler's comments about kind of broadening the terminology we're using regarding living shorelines. So
Okay.
making sure we're broadening that. In terms of the freeboard, I mean, I'm a big advocate of looking at this, and I know that when we're thinking about 8 feet, that's really going to knock some people off of their feet. But I agree that we do need to look at the state's updated recommendations and FEMA's updated recommendations. And, we have a start here of suggesting by an additional foot above base flood. But I just want to understand that that's just kind of opening the conversation, and that may not be where we land.
That's right. Yep.
And then on G, if we're talking about considering other aspects of climate resiliency, then I think if we're talking about post-storm recovery, then we should probably throw preparedness in there, because I think it's also relevant.
And I'm sorry, that was which letter you were referring to?
That was G.
G. Yes.
I'll cut it. All right. Commissioner Piccolo?
I think lots of it have been covered. Just curious if we had even incorporated anything about docks or dock structures or building of docks for resiliency. As we know, storms, we'll have storms, we'll have many more storms ahead of us, and whether or not we've incorporated any of that for construction for resiliency.
We did have something.
It's in letter E.
Piling sizes, things of that nature.
Okay.
Oh, okay, in E, so add to E. Okay,
All right. Moving on to the next.
sure. So this is, the next section is codes, organization, formatting, and usability, and this is an issue that will come up in all of the modules that we draft, but generally it's to just make the document easier to read and understand, easier to find information, using internal and external hyperlinks where we can so that people can quickly navigate the document and find external information that they need. Also just using plain, clear language, defining terms that are commonly used, which we'll talk about in the next section as well. Also introducing more graphics where needed to explain regulatory standards, and then using tables and potentially like flow charts for procedures, just anything that we can do to make it, again, easier for folks to read and understand. Happy to take any comments or questions.
Okay. Commissioner Spiegler?
I don't really have any questions. I think this is great. Really looking forward to seeing, something searchable with graphics, figures, whatever makes it easier to use and communicate. I think that's great. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
No comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
I have anything right.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
No comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Piccolo?
No comment.
All right, thank you. So when you say that the document will be searchable, that's something that we can be online and actually put in a buzzword and it would go straight to that particular section?
Sure. So there are a number of ways that you all could choose to publish this online. Probably the simplest is just a PDF, which is certainly easily searchable.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you. On to the next.
All right. So the next section is definitions, and this is another topic that spans all of the 5 drafting modules that we talk about at the end. Generally, the intent here would be to consolidate definitions into a single place, like a glossary in the back of a book, expand and update definitions where needed. Also here, it can incorporate graphics and illustrations to clarify definitions of terms. We have had some specific examples of land use definitions that need clarification that came up in our conversations a couple of months ago. And then the last thing here is to try to exclude regulatory requirements or standards from definitions. So an example of this would be like if you had a size limit for an accessory structure. You wouldn't put that size limit in the definition. You would have another section for accessory structures that people would go to get the actual standards. We would keep the definition more like a glossary or a dictionary that's just strictly the definition of the term.
Okay. Are you looking for comments on this?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Spiegler?
No comments.
Commissioner Oliver?
Obviously, number D needs to be a lot longer, but again, so what you include in that, I'd be interested in. Thank you.
Are there specific land uses or terms that you would suggest adding, just so that they're on our list?
I'll add them as I think about them, but not at this point, no. But
Okay.
But I think that's gonna be a long list.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Cooper?
Well, it's in the definition, and So, tiny homes. Are we talking the little mobile type ones that you can hitch to the back of your vehicle and move it on a piece of property? Is that the definition, or what would be the definition of that?
Well, that's something that we would develop during the UDO, but many communities define tiny homes on wheels differently than tiny homes. So a tiny home would be on a permanent foundation, and a tiny home on wheels is often regulated just like any other RV, recreational vehicle. For tiny homes, we typically look to the building code definition, which I think they max out at 400 square feet, but that's certainly not required. I mean, you all could decide you want a tiny home to go up to 800 square feet or something like that. So that's something we'd flesh out during the drafting process.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
No comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopicolo?
Just a few definitions that came to mind were like buffers and setbacks, kind of clarifying that because I think we've had issues with that in the past.
So what is the fine line between a tiny home and accessory building? Because I want a tiny home, I just want to know.
It's really however you all want to draft it. I mean, a tiny home would be a livable dwelling unit. So it would include a kitchen and a bathroom and a sleeping area, whereas an accessory building or structure would not have to have any of those things. And a lot of communities would actually prohibit an accessory structure from having a kitchen because that's what makes it a dwelling unit.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. All right, any further questions? On to the next.
All right, so the next section is zoning districts. So here we've got several subsections. So density would be the first one. There was some recognition among stakeholders that increases in residential density may be necessary to accomplish your goals with respect to housing affordability. So that has to be balanced, of course, with the town's other goals. We have provided an example about a density bonus in the TCA district. This is another one of those things that would be fleshed out during the drafting process in terms of exactly what that number might be, but that starts to show you the shape of what a density bonus incentive for affordable workforce housing could look like. There's a brief sentence on conditional zoning. I understand that you all have it, but I don't think it's ever been used. So there were some stakeholders that were surprised that the town had conditional zoning because they hadn't seen it used. And maybe that is something that the town may want to sort of encourage the use of. We also heard some sentiment about reviewing or revisiting the PUD standards just to make sure that you're getting the type of development that you want to see and that the community wants to see. We also had a question, and this comes up in a lot of communities, about determining whether and how the UDO can address legacy PUDs. And that could be potentially ones that were approved but maybe not fully developed, and what's the best way to move those forward under current standards versus perhaps some that were approved 10, 20 years ago. The last section in here is overlay districts. So this had a specific recommendation to consider expanding the boundary of the Cedar Street mixed-use district towards the western end, and determining whether that should include both sides of the street. Again, some conversations about residential density as it relates to mixed-use developments. So the town has an entry corridor overlay district that was intended to implement the entry master plan, but as I understand it, there aren't any standards for that district. And so the question to consider during the UDO drafting process is whether to maintain and add standards to that overlay district and what those standards might be. Yeah, I think that's it. So if y'all have any comments there, happy to take those.
All right, Commissioner Spiegler.
I would I very much support the incentives for increased density by allowing increased density for things like open space and affordable workforce housing. I think that's a good incentive for us to put into this ordinance update. So I support that. The only other thing in this section I wanted to point out is under Plan Unit Development District Part C, I support this, clarify the necessary components included in the PUD approval process, for example, site plans, development agreements, and our code standards. Would it be possible to also include a timeline in that section as well? So what's the timeline for getting all those things to the town and revisit what's appropriate?
A timeline for the application process?
Yes, and is that the wrong section? Is that in a different section?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
It might come up under procedures, but yeah, we would definitely have, the procedural section would definitely include timelines in terms of like application deadlines that we were referring to prior to a meeting. Yeah.
Right, and how far in advance, for the staff to review it? When does it fall in the, related to our board meetings and the planning board meetings, that sort of thing? I think it'd be good to revisit those
Gotcha.
Deadlines.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Oliver?
The other thing I would suggest, as you have some of the other plans, the entry master plan in C, I think maybe you give it reference up in the introduction too, because I believe it to be a critical part of where we're headed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just waiting for her to type it all up.
Yep, got it.
Okay. Commissioner
Thank you.
Cooper?
Wouldn't not some of this also already be covered in our camera plan? The zoning district? Especially in 6.2C, the TCA district concerning the density for bonus for developer. Got some notes here. Actually lower, is that not lowering the density that we presently have?
So, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the current density is 12 units per acre. So the example is if you wanted to keep that density at the same level, you could incentivize, you could lower the base density to 10 and give the extra 2 as an incentive. But again, that's just an example, and that's something that we can talk through during the drafting process. Perhaps the board feels that the base density should remain at 12 and you could go, the density bonus would go beyond that 12. And the first part of your question, we will definitely look to the CAMA plan and the other adopted plans for policy direction as we start drafting.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
I like the density bonus idea in B, but maybe we could expand it beyond open space.
Okay. Beyond to what other topics?
To other techniques, like if someone goes and puts in a completely, all the parking spaces are pervious and they add extra long-lived trees and, if they do other really big, stormwater related things or resilience related things. So maybe not just open space.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. Commissioner Piccolo?
I don't have a problem with bonus. I feel like 12 is a good number right now. I think we could go a little higher with that. I do have an issue. We didn't really address anything with parking, and I think parking is something really critical that we need to look at. And I think it's different in different locations. I think TCAs in downtown probably reduce the amount of parking and allow people parking on streets because you can have overflow and so forth. But when you have fixed developments like we've had in the past, they need more parking. There's not any places for those developments to park when they have people over and there's a party or an event or anything like that. So I think we really need to look at that. I think when we look at pervious pavement, I think we also need to include things in there that needs to be maintained, vacuum clean, because once dirt's into that pervious pavement, it really is not doing what it was intended to do.
Right.
So I think those things also need to be included as well.
Okay.
So, and I think we need to look at, some of the most controversial things we've had in our community are planned unit developments. And, you almost feel that sometimes if our current, land development ordinance had districts that could be used and weren't so difficult maybe for that developer to use, that we wouldn't have to move on to PUDs. You almost feel like sometimes PUDs are just a go-to because it's a failure of what we have in our zoning. So if we really can kind of look at our zoning and make our zoning work, then we can have less issues and controversial PUDs coming our way.
Yep. Agree. Yes, that's often the case in the communities we work in. They turn to PD because of the inadequacy of the other standards to produce the desired development. Okay.
Unless there's any further questions or comments, we're going to move on to the next.
Okay, so this is one of the longer sections, so I won't spend too much time introducing it, but uses and use regulations would be something that we would take up in the second module along with zoning districts. We would suggest consolidating, well, you have a use table now, but we would suggest that that would be the only list of uses, so you don't have a separate list in each of the zoning districts, because that can end up with conflicts if you change something in one place and forget to do it in the other place. So we'll look at all of the uses, make sure that they're appropriate in the districts in which they are allowed, see if there are any that don't have use-specific standards where it might be appropriate to add use-specific standards, or potentially an SUP process for additional uses. Transitional areas, so we did hear some input that some of the commercial districts allow too many uses for lots adjacent to residential areas, so that's something to revisit. Housing types and affordability. One way to sort of indirectly come at housing affordability is to allow for a variety of housing options, to include accessory dwelling units, triplexes, quadplexes, tiny homes. So the UDO should explore all these different categories of housing to see what might be appropriate for Beaufort, in what locations, and with what standards. Accessory dwelling units did come up, and that's something that everyone has expressed a desire to continue to allow. We would suggest revisiting those standards just to make sure that they are still working, and to see if there's anything else that the town could do to incentivize those. They do provide potentially a source of affordable housing. They can provide additional income for homeowners, but they can also just be helpful for families to have an additional unit on the property for children, grandparents, that sort of thing. We did hear from stakeholders that the approval process for accessory dwelling units might prevent some people from taking advantage of it, so that's something to examine during the UDO as well. The last issue, or the last use that's specifically mentioned in this section, is short-term rentals, which the town doesn't expressly regulate today. But we heard from folks in the community that there is a desire to regulate short-term rentals to some degree. That, again, is that the degree to which the town wants to regulate those would be something to discuss during the UDO process. Happy to take any comments here.
Okay. Commissioner Spiegler?
I just want to say, I think it's page 14. 7.3 housing types and affordability D. So site standards including street trees, landscaping, pedestrian, bicycle facilities, and open space. I think that's great. Very glad we have that included. For the one question I'm going to ask about short-term rentals, or maybe not a question, sort of a thought, I think having guidance about what the town's options are based on the state laws, I think that's what's going to be helpful for us to figure out, what our options are.
Sure, we can definitely provide that.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
The only comment I have here is under 7.5D, in the short-term rentals thing, I'm not sure it's fair at this stage that we're going to expect to result in a wholesale, not going to expect a change in a wholesale or complete overhaul. I think that may not necessarily be totally, that depends on how it's perceived. It depends on the user. And I think that particular statement is a little ahead of our decision path.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Cooper?
7.2, transitional area. I think we as commissioners need to look at that between residential and commercial. We recently had an issue there, and so I think we need to see about our teeth or the bite in whatever we have that is strong enough to sustain between a residential area and a commercial area that butts up against each other.
Mm-hmm.
7.5, the short-term rental. God, that's, I introduced this year when I first came on because I saw a problem arising, and it has risen. And I'm not sure if we wait around for if the state is ever going to really address short-term rental, because I think some of our legislators don't want to get into that mix of being able to probably tell a homeowner what he can and can't do with his property.
Sure.
So somehow I think we need to get into that mix and define exactly where, how many can. I mean, there are some streets here that practically is all short-term rentals. And that leaving a void in terms of people looking for a place to live.
Right.
So we need to address it. And like, once again, if we wait around for the state, it may be 10 years down the road. Yeah, if not long. True. Man, that's all I have right now.
Okay. Commissioner Gilligan?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioners Cooper and Oliver about the short-term rentals and also removing the statement in D that is not expected to result in a wholesale change.
Okay.
We have been waiting on this for a long time, and that I don't even know where that proposed state legislation is, if it got pulled or what, but maybe we should just move forward on the outcomes of the litigations that have happened in North Carolina and put ourselves out there and at least implement some really basic things. I think it might be time to make some sort of move.
And there are communities that are doing it and then are not having to face these litigations. But they're making some movement, but we could probably look at some of those that are out there. But you're right. Commissioner Piccolo? I'm sorry, Commissioner Gilligan, were you done?
Oh, no.
Okay. Commissioner Piccolo?
Thank you for compiling this. This, when I read through this, this basically had almost every hot topic that came through the planning board and the commissioners, and I mean, it's pretty thorough. There's lots of good topics here to go over and mull over. I'm definitely for allowing for density in our downtown. People love our historic district, and funny enough, that's the highest density area in our community. So allowing for ADUs, I think, is helpful, will help to alleviate some of the long-term renting needs in our community, and also allowing for triplexes and so forth, I think would be helpful as well. Short-term rentals, we're definitely going to have to tackle and look into and see what the consensus is. No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Kelly, we're talking about affordable housing and types. Is there any way that you can gather data that would support whether a tiny home would be, in some communities, used as affordable housing and not just another niche for high-price housing, just on a smaller scale. Accessory dwellings, I mean, how are they going to impact affordable housing? What are the statistics that someone who has an accessory dwelling would use that for long-term rental opportunities other than short-term rentals? The attraction for short-term rentals, I would imagine, would be higher. And is there any way of incentivizing these types of housing options to be considered within range? And then we have to probably come up with a definition of what's affordable, right?
Like, I don't know if Michelle can answer in terms of, there are some particular units that are being used now, somebody help me out here.
Okay.
No, not modular, no. Cargo,
Shipping containers.
Shipping
Shipping
containers.
containers, yes.
Oh, yeah. They're
Yes,
big in
yes.
Asheville. Mhm.
yes. Is there anything on our books pertaining to being able to use those where you can stack? I mean, I've seen some very nice ones. And I'm just wondering if that might even help us in the range of housing that can easily be put up and.
Yeah, so that would be an acceptable option as long as it meets building code. Then it would be regarded as single-family home meeting building code, stick-built. I guess it would partially be modular because part of it is assembled off-site and brought in. But as long as it meets building code, it would be considered a single-family home.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
I know of a specific example in Wilmington where somebody's built shipping container houses, so it appears that it can be done under a North Carolina building code, but it's something that we could look into.
Yeah, some of them look really nice.
They are really nice. They're all in Asheville, so that's really pretty good idea. All right, any further questions before we move on? Okay, Kelly, next.
Okay, next section is development and design standards, and this is probably the longest section. So this covers
That section was long.
stormwater, erosion and sediment control, lot coverage, setbacks and height, building design, infill, community character, trees, landscaping, and buffer yards, parking, signs, exterior lighting. So I, just due to the length, I won't get into specifics, but happy to take any comments that y'all have.
Okay. Commissioner Spiegler, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, this is a long one. I will start with the 8.5 trees, landscaping, and buffers. I think this is very important. I'm not sure if this is part of is this going to be in the second phase of the update?
Yes, so this, if we go with the module schedule, the drafting, sort of general drafting schedule that we've proposed, this would be the third module, so it would come after zoning districts and use regulations, which really set the standard, or, I'm sorry, set the foundation
Right.
for these standards.
So even though it's not in the first phase with our RCCP resilience grant, I think that can inform this phase. And
Sure.
thinking about why trees, landscaping, buffers are great for the community, for building design, but also the resilience measures that they provide, that trees provide. When we're thinking about landscaping, thinking outside the box, landscaping, unique landscaping that can also address stormwater, right? And we also know clear cutting trees is not good for flooding and stormwater control. So I would really encourage us to continue thinking with a resilience lens when we get to this section. Also, the native plant policy, I think we should include a native plant policy that can also incorporate resilience measures. I think there's the parking section here as well. I know this is a really hot topic. I'm not really going to get into it right now, but I will say, I think including, and I can't remember if it's in this section or not, but thinking outside the box again here as well, let's try to encourage alternative forms of transportation like biking and walking. And so making sure that we have facilities for biking like bike racks, fix-it stations, water stations, multi-use paths, that kind of thing, and using that as a way to also think about our parking challenges. And that's all I've got right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
I don't have anything at this time on this section.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
None.
Thank you. Commissioner Gillikin?
Nothing really jumps out. I think everything looks pretty good.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Commissioner Lo-Piccolo?
Again, really extensive job here and lots of good points. Moving on to the section regarding exterior lighting, we had this come up with one of the developments in town, but looking at making standards for lighting, where exterior lighting is soft lighting versus LED or real bright lighting. Also looking at dock lighting and underwater lighting in our community as well, and having the discussion of whether or not we want to continue with that.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. When you're done, we're ready to move on.
Ready?
Okay.
Okay, the next section is subdivision and land development. So here, the first thing is to eliminate the $10,000 cap on recreation fees that y'all talked about before. Let's see, so there's a number of miscellaneous comments there. We also have two other sections, open space and conservation areas. Just generally, the UDO would consider requirements for open space set-asides, clustering, and/or density transfers where appropriate during the subdivision process. Open space requirements could also apply to other types of developments, not just subdivisions. There was also some conversation with stakeholders about protecting archaeological sites, historical sites, so the town could consider ways to do that, which could be buffers or other techniques. And then there's some input on mobility, sidewalk requirements for new subdivisions, new developments. Ms. Spiegler, to your point, improved infrastructure for pedestrian and bike travelers. Yeah, I think that covers it. Happy to take any comments.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Spiegler.
Thank you. For the section 9.2 open space and conservation areas, I guess it's under mobility, under D, in areas without existing sidewalks, requiring the constructions of sidewalks in conjunction with development or redevelopment can result in a disconnected sidewalk system. However, this may be the most cost-effective way to provide improved sidewalks over the long term. I was just wondering, could you maybe explain what that means?
Sure. So if you have new development or redevelopment in an area that doesn't have existing sidewalks, the town could require the developer to put those sidewalks in along the extent of their property's frontage. If there aren't other sidewalks in the area, that could be the only property for a period of time that has a sidewalk. So you have disconnected sidewalks. However, if you don't require the developer to do it, if you ever want sidewalks there, it would ultimately be up to the town to fund the construction.
Okay,
So
that was
just
helpful.
something to
Yes,
think
thank
about.
you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly, and yes, that makes sense now. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Oliver?
So following on that, how will this impact areas, for instance, that have no sidewalks, never have, and are vested? What are we going to do about that, if anything?
Well, that's something for y'all to consider.
Thanks a lot.
You can certainly have sidewalk requirements that vary by district, by use, by type of development. So we could, by geographic area even. So there may be some areas that don't have sidewalks and you don't want sidewalks there, and that's completely appropriate. So we can dig into the details when we get to the drafting process, but hard decisions are going to be
So we're
up
going
to
to
y'all.
kick that down. Okay, I got it. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you for the night.
Yes,
Commissioner Cooper?
Well, obviously, if for its cost, I would like to see some developer to put in sidewalks. That certainly would be a cost factor for the town that we wouldn't have to put in our budget somewhere down the road, because eventually we like for our citizens to be able to walk safely throughout the town. And if a new developer come in, I do not want where their children or their parents who want to take a stroll is out having to walk out in the middle of the street. So I would definitely like to see us enforce that in terms of sidewalk on both sides of the street.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Gilligan?
I think this section also relates to the resilience theme, and a big one for me that jumps out is D, basically construction activities on adjacent properties, sending water your way, or water down the street to all the neighbors' houses. It's a big issue with those people. You know, I've seen some people that live close to me, they're now getting water at the foundation of their houses, and they never have before. And when the adjacent properties were developed, that started happening. So they could have, you know, bigger storm impacts because of that, and their recovery time could be a lot longer than other people. So I'm really going to be keying in on that one.
Okay.
Otherwise, I don't have comments on the rest of the section.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Piccolo?
I don't know if there was a way we could also address some of the building process during the land development phase, and so that there's a little more enforcement, or town has a little more teeth with making sure that, you know, soil that's discharged from lots during the development that end up in the street or end up in the drains and into the stormwater drains in the community are being addressed or being checked often to make sure that that's being kept up with. So some type of like schedule or some type of way of making sure that during that development phase that we're, you know, the developer and the town are basically the town's making sure that there's compliance. And I'm not sure how often that's being done today, but
Okay.
kind of addressing that.
Okay, got it.
We can carry on?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, the last topic area in terms of drafting is procedures and administration. So this is something that we would recommend taking up at the end of the drafting process, the final module. We heard a desire from community members for more public participation, expanded public notice requirements. This is, Commissioner Spiegler, we do have the item in C here about evaluating application submittal deadlines for staff. There are some specific issues in here regarding, for example, approval authority for preliminary and final plats, the requirements, whether or not to maintain the requirement for environmental impact statements, revising some, like the current site plan procedure, or potentially the applicability or the threshold for requiring site plan review. And then also consideration of implementing requirements for a traffic impact analysis for developments that exceed a certain size. Happy to take any comments.
Okay. Commissioner Spiegler?
I definitely support the expanding the public notice standards to increase the number of days. I think we should also increase the area adjacent to the development that gets notified as well. And then for letter J, the approving of preliminary and final plats, could you maybe explain that one a little bit?
Sure. So the statutes, 160D, specifically says that decisions on preliminary and final plats have to be made on the basis of standards that are explicitly set forth in this case, the UDO. And so that means there's no room for discretion. And so if you have objective standards in the UDO, it makes sense, or it may make sense, for that to be an administrative or staff level approval. Some of this does go back to public perception and understanding. Often, community members see, for example, a subdivision plat on the agenda and think that the board has discretion in whether or not to approve that, when under the statute you actually don't. So it can help provide clarity to the community about the process. So if the UDO establishes the standards that you all want to see in new developments, and is producing the type of development you want to see, then that would be another reason to delegate that responsibility to staff. And this was something that came up with the planning board, and they also expressed a concern with reviewing plats that they basically have to approve if they meet the standards. So
Is this common in other town UDOs?
it often becomes a political issue, because while it can be confusing to see something on an agenda and think that there's discretion, it also just makes the public aware of new developments that are coming and gives them more information than they might otherwise be able to get. So what it really comes down to is just a policy decision, and in some communities, it's also a staffing capacity decision, or a board, if the planning board is seeing tons of applications, that this may be a way to cut down on that. So there's a lot of things that factor into that decision for individual communities.
So right now, we are not making a decision about that. We're just saying we're going to consider it at the next step.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's on the list to talk about when we get to the last module, so you'll have plenty of time to think about it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
Because another way of saying that is if you put everything in the ordinance, everything becomes a by right approval.
Not necessarily by right, but when you get to, so if you're, in the case of a subdivision, the developer would potentially come to you all for a rezoning. So you as the board make the legislative decision to rezone the property to this particular district that has these particular requirements. And if they meet the requirements, then it.
All right. Yep. That's why you have to be careful with this.
Right.
On that section 10G, that comes back, I think, originally to the point that you brought up earlier tonight of testing facilities and services versus growth. That's what that's talking about right there.
The annexation process. Yes, sir.
That's exactly that point. And again, I think it will be surprising in this community as we look into that. I think there's more consensus on this board than there may be in the community. But we need to really spend some time on that one, because I think that will be a very interesting discussion.
Okay.
Commissioner Cooper?
Tierney, I agree with the stakeholders. I think that some, developers should take the blunt of whatever they need for impact studies.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see that the town need to be the one providing that financial cost. I agree with the stakeholders on that. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Gilligan?
So where would it be appropriate to address a complaint of someone who now sees water coming over to their property that wasn't coming to their property prior to the adjacent one being developed? Would that be in this section or elsewhere?
It could potentially. It may fall under the enforcement section, which would be part of this 5th module. It may also fall under erosion and sedimentation control chapter, or I don't know if it'd be a chapter, but under those regulations. Could be in both places.
Okay. Well, just so we capture the need to make sure we address it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, John.
In regards to the preliminary plat, I'm against just rubber stamping that and then having that just go through the town. I've seen, with being on the planning board, I've seen firsthand experiences where the members were able to, some of the members who were engineers and had ample knowledge of design and implementation of the infrastructure, were able to point out some problems with the preliminary plat. And for instance, I think there was an issue where there was a road that was below the flood level. and made the developer move that up about a foot or so. So I think it's dangerous just to allow just rubber stamping. Most of the time, the preliminary plats are fine. There's no issues. The town engineer does a great job with it. But human nature, there's always things that can be missed, and I think it's good to have another set of eyes on it so that we don't run into problems like we have past with other areas in our community with flooding and road issues, and so I would rather keep that in place.
Okay.
Okay,
All righty.
all right,
Any further questions? 2 more to go, Kelly.
all right. So these last 2 sections are not specifically about draft in terms of not about content of the UDO. So this section is public outreach during phase 2, and what we heard from the community and from you all at our last session was that the UDO process should include some unique outreach techniques. Example, outreach at the farmers market, other community events. There should be a variety of formats of information, but printed hard copy, online, potentially social media or project website. That the UDO process should provide engagement opportunities at different times of day. Perhaps 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening might not be the best time for some folks. That it may be, in order to reach all of the population, it may be better to go out perhaps on a weekend. We also heard from several folks interested in being community volunteers to work at information booths or help with meetings or canvassing, going door to door. So that's another unique approach to public outreach. There's also a suggestion for a community survey, which could be available online in hard copy that somebody could fill out and bring in or mail into the town, and also through a live polling session that would happen at a community meeting. A lot of you can do them right on your cell phone so we could get some information through the survey process. And then this kind of ties back into the first thing that y'all talked about tonight about the community visioning component. So earlier, y'all talked about kind of a vision statement and goals for the UDO itself. You could tie in the community through sort of a visual preference survey, just to kind of understand the types of development that people want to see, and it's easier for people to look at pictures and say, yes, this is Beaufort, this is not Beaufort. Do y'all have anything that you would add to the items included here?
Commissioner Spiegler?
I think y'all did a pretty good job here. I would echo what Commissioner LaPiccolo said earlier. I think it's really important to get a diverse group of voices, so including, all sides, making sure we have the development community at the table too. I think the more we hear from all parts of our community, the better informed this document will be, and then at the end, the better buy-in there will be, and something that the whole community, we're all gonna have to make some compromises, but I think if we get as many voices as we can at the table, diverse range, then that process will lead to a better product and outcome.
I agree.
So,
Yep.
Thank you.
Commissioner Oliver? No comment. Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
I agree with terms of being able to hold community meetings. I know it's really difficult for us to move our commissioner meeting. One, because of especially one of the first of the month, in terms of being Zoom and also speaker thing, but we definitely need to move, because I think there is, in fact, a large population of the citizens on the north side here that never come to these. And that's not good, because again, sometimes misinformation goes out, and they're hearing that misinformation and get a whole entirely different perspective of what actually we are doing here on a monthly basis. I think reaching out, being able to reach out to those, it would be very beneficial for the town as well as for us as well. And I think possibly we will hopefully have one soon. Is that right, Charlie?
Yes.
Thank you.
Were you, Commissioner Cooper, suggesting potentially including virtual meetings as an option at some points along the way?
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
All right, Commissioner Gilligan?
I think this reflects the conversations that a lot of the stakeholders had, or opinions that a lot of the feedback we're going to get is going to have to be cultivated, on the ground. I like the ideas about the community volunteers, and I may have even suggested it and committed myself. I think actually Sharon and I both said that we were going to walk around
Door to door.
But I think that means a lot, and we've seen it with previous surveys in the past, that we really have to cultivate the responses, that we can't just hold up a staff and have people come to us.
Right.
So I think this incorporates that pretty well. So
Okay, great.
I don't have any further comments.
Thank you. Commissioner LoPiccolo?
No comment. No comment.
Very good. Then there was one.
All right. Closing in here. So we've touched on this a little bit as we've talked through this, but so what we propose is drafting the UDO in modules. It's a lot of information, right? It's going to be a lengthy document, and it's really hard to digest the whole thing in one sitting. We've suggested here a series of 5 different modules. So the first one would be, as we've talked about, the resilience updates, because the town is under a time constraint with the grant that's associated with the funding for that module. Module 2, be zoning districts and use regulations, as well as minimum housing standards. As I mentioned, this really sets the foundation for the rest of the ordinance. A number of standards would be based on particular zoning districts, so we like to get those done at the beginning. The third would be development and design standards, all of those things that go into develop parking signs, lighting, et cetera. 4 would be subdivision regulations and flood damage prevention. And then the last module would be administration and procedures. And what we would anticipate is for each of those, there would be a series of drafts, sort of like what we've done with the codes assessment. It would start with a staff review draft. We'd incorporate staff revisions and have a community review draft. We also have to think about how to fold in the subcommittee, but the community review draft would typically go to Planning Board and Board of Commissioners for review, and the community could have input at that point. And then revisions to that would happen at the end of the project. So we'd revise all of those community review drafts at the end to produce the final document. I guess I just raised one question about the kind of when to tie in the UDO. I can't remember if it's a subcommittee or steering committee, I apologize. We've worked in communities where they review the same drafts that staff reviews, and we kind of incorporate all that comment together. We've worked in other communities where the subcommittee or steering committee reviews it at the same time, the same draft that the planning board and the public reviews, and they just have a separate meeting, maybe more time to dig into it. So that's something for y'all to think about going forward as well, just how best to engage that steering committee. The last... I think I covered all of that. I would reiterate that we would have the town's project manager would be sort of the collector of input, and all comments and input would go through them, so they would consolidate it and identify where there might be conflicting opinions or conflicting direction, and either resolve that or seek our assistance in that, where we're always happy to help provide alternatives for consideration or kind of facilitate the decision-making process if there are items that really need the Planning Board and the Board of Commissioners to weigh in on. I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions or take any input on that section.
Commissioner Spiegler?
No questions. Well, one question. I was intrigued, and I'm not sure if it's the very last footnote of the entire draft. and it's about the possibility of using a public commenting feature. And it's, I think, a technology platform that I've never used before, so I was just intrigued, and I thought that might be an interesting way to gather feedback from our community.
Sure. There's, I'm sure there are multiple platforms that can be used, but we like to use a program called Conveo. So you'd have the code document drafts or the final document posted online where the community can come in, and it's basically a draft. Everyone's looking at the same draft, and you can put in comments, and everybody can go in and see what other comments have been posted. You can respond to those comments. The project team can reply to questions. It has some good reporting features, so you can export out comment reports so that you all, as the elected officials, can get kind of a summary, or actually you can get a summary or a printout of all the comments that you've received so that we can keep track of everything together. It's just a really good way to consolidate comments and keep track of everything.
Thank you.
Commissioner Oliver?
Are you going to revise this document?
Yes, sir.
So two things I noticed. One, if you're going to revise this, I would ask you to provide a red line of the revisions.
Okay.
So that we know where the revisions are.
Yes, sir.
And the second, from a format, just a small point, but sections 2 and 6 through 9 are formatted in a slightly different way that sections 3 through 5 and 10 through 12 are. It's just a numbering issue, and I suspect it's probably done because different people did it in your organization, and I'd just like to see conformity between those two areas.
Sure. How are they different?
I'll show you
Oh,
after the
some of
meeting.
them have subsections and some of them don't?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's just a numbering issue, and I would try to get it conformed the same, just for those of us that are old.
It's just him.
Just him.
He's ain't like that. I think OCD or something.
I can't wait to see the
think
Conveo
OCD.
version.
I just wait OCD or something.
Yeah.
I think it's OCD. I
That's
think.
gonna be fun.
Yeah, that ADH complex. Or,
Any comments for you, Commissioner Cooper?
Great job.
Thank you.
I was able to follow along with the numbers.
Commissioner Gilligan?
No comments.
Commissioner Piccolo?
No comments.
Okay.
Just Bucky.
But who's going to be watching and monitoring this Conveo? I mean, we had about, if everybody's making comments and probably looking for a response. Oh, my God.
We can have administrators set up, so
Okay.
somebody from White and Smith and somebody from staff can be administrators and go in and keep track of everything.
Elizabeth is the answer.
No.
Thank you. Don't put that on
Or
me.
something else. Yeah, a little support would be necessary for
Absolutely.
staff to help if you're going to get flooded with those kind of comments and being able to, I don't know if you know how to use Conveo or not, but a learning curve. But anyway, very good.
But let me say, at the end, it might actually be easier than getting 100 emails on the same thing. Instead, you just see all of them right in one spot.
It is.
Yeah, yeah.
That-
So it
that's
might
one-
actually
that's one
make
of the
it
main
easier.
benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But support Michelle.
Yes,
Okay.
can do.
All righty, any further questions or comments? Anything else you need from us?
Can you, I think you said, I was looking at the calendar, so y'all are going to be back at our November 12th regular board meeting, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
Tyson will be here.
okay.
I have a conflict, kind of another code, but we will prepare a redlined version and a clean version for you all. Our schedule has comment deadline tomorrow, and then we'll get you that final version on or before October 29th, so you'll have it a couple weeks in advance of your November meeting.
Okay, and just to confirm, it's our regular board meeting that month, not our work session that they're coming to?
Correct.
12th. Yes.
Yes.
November
Okay.
12th.
Board of Commissioners.
All right,
meeting.
thank you.
Yes. All right. All right, well, Kelly, thank you. Mr. Smith, thank you for taking your time to come out and review this with us, and I hope we provided you some more input to
Yes.
come back, and we'll talk about it later.
Yes, great.
All
Thank you
right.
very much for
Thank
your
you.
input.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Now we're going to move on to the 2025 Board of Commissioners Annual Retreat. Would you like me to take that on, Elizabeth?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, we have been putting retreats together for the past 2 years, and they've seemed to prove very valuable. It helps us align our goals and visions. And this year's retreat, we've had to juggle a few things. Elizabeth has, I will say that when I say we. But we have the Carteret Community College Hospitality and Culinary Center has agreed to host us this year, as well as their culinary students will have an opportunity to help prepare our meals, which makes a good combination of collaborations there, so that will be a great experience. We also have Fountain Works has been given us the dates that they are available, along with the culinary building, which will be February 6th through the 7th this year.
Next year.
Of next year, excuse me, of next year. So it would be great to have a discussion at this point in time as to the tentative plans and if it's okay to go ahead and move forward. So Commissioner Spiegler.
Are you asking about the dates or just in general?
Dates in general, and are we okay with the community college as the venue and?
Yes
one?
and yes. I am good with the dates and I'm good with the community college. It's actually right next door to my work office, so
Well,
that's
there
great.
you go.
Yes, I'm fine with these dates. I would not want to push it any later into February.
Okay, all righty. Commissioner Oliver?
I don't have my calendar with me, so I'll let you know tomorrow.
All right, so you'll be there February 6th and 7th. That's fine. Okay, Commissioner Cooper?
Will they, prior to the retreat, send us what we spoke on this retreat for this year, our goals and objectives, as a reminder?
Most likely, because we have used Fountain Work before, they are very familiar with where we are, so it's easy for them to be able to pull that information forward and allow for us to move forward.
Who did we use this year?
Fountain Works?
Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So they're familiar with where we are. That's a good thing, having that continuity. But we can definitely also come with a primer where we were and where we hope to be in
February,
2025.
yeah, February 6th and 7th is good. Just one other thing,
Okay.
the menu itself, I guess we have no say-so on that.
Well, we haven't come to that part yet, so I mean, we're still working out some final details. This is a little higher level request. Are we okay with the venue, the dates,
Yeah,
and
I'm
the
fine with-
facilitator?
yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Gilligan?
It's on my calendar.
Oh, fantastic.
Ooh.
Commissioner Lil Piccolo?
It's on my calendar, 7:30, 8 o'clock start time.
Oh, yeah, start time.
Well, we'll get into that as well. We haven't come up with the agenda yet, so we can start as early as you like.
Not too early.
The last time we started pretty early one day and late the next.
It's typically a breakfast and then
Set,
start
yes.
time of 8 or 8:30, depending
Okay.
on the layout.
What was that time? What was that time again?
He's getting up, don't worry about it.
Don't say it.
Did you say 8:30?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's good.
That's, oh, okay, very, very good. All righty. All right, we don't need to necessarily, we have a consensus here, so we're pretty good. All righty, thank you very much for that. Now we're going to move on to the Beaufort Waterfront Operations and Finance Committee update. We're going to take it over to Commissioner Spiegler, who's the chair of the committee, as well as Commissioner Gillikin, who's the co-chair.
Yes, okay, thank you all. Thanks for everybody for sitting through the codes assessment. We had our first Beaufort Waterfront Operations and Finance meeting on September 5th, and we had our second meeting on September 26th, and I just want to say what a great group we have on our committee. So we've been together now less than 6 weeks, I think, officially, and there has been so much work done already, so much enthusiasm, so much motivation by our committee members. So we have 2 of them here today, but I want to say thank you to all of them who have done great work and are continuing to push us forward. So I'm actually not going to give the updates today. We're going to hear from 3 of our committee members about what transpired at our last BWOF meeting on September 26th. But I do want to let everybody know that we have our next committee meeting this Thursday, October 17th, here in the train depot at 1 p.m. And everybody who is invited to attend. So again, today we're going to hear updates from our September 26th meeting. So we're going to start with Paula, and she's going to give an update about our discussion related to goals and objectives. Then we'll hear from Vic Fasolino about construction updates, and then lastly, we'll hear from Dexter Matthews with a finance update. So first, we'll start with Paula.
Okay, so we have a slide up. I tried to make the font as big as possible, but for any project you undertake, of course, you need something to strive for, just something to keep your eyes on. So we came up with some objectives for the dock improvement and operations. Initially, this could be extended to the whole master plan in time, but we needed to start here because we were starting a lot of research as the committee was even forming on these topics. So we needed to be able to touch base to some solid objectives. So we did this through a survey that all the committee members completed, and then we followed up with 2 discussions after that and a little prioritization activity. So I just wanted to go over the objectives really quickly. The first one that we agreed upon, all these were agreed upon by consensus. The town contributes external funding to components of the harbor improvement project related to the docks. And we acknowledge that we don't know what types or amounts of funding, but that we are recommending that the town does seek external funding, and there's some effort underway to do that actually. So this may look different whether or not we manage it ourselves, whether a third party manages it, whether it's a public-private partnership, but we do acknowledge that if any one of those scenarios I just mentioned comes to fruition, that we do want to contribute some external funds. The next one is to maintain the functional aspects of the current dock design that work well because they have been tested and refined over several decades. We agreed that a continuous face dock to better accommodate super and mega yachts is not desired. We agreed that adequate dock accommodations for super and mega yachts currently exist, and that the number that visit us may end up staying about the same. And we acknowledge that with the extension of the East Basin, the design may need to be modified and or generated. So we're not committed to a certain design now. This committee's job is not to come up with a very detailed design, but we do need to understand what our goals are for the design. Next one is maintain and or improve the viewscape to Taylor's Creek and across to the Rachel Carson Reserve. And we all agreed that we should be maintaining the size of the gaps between the T heads as they currently are, and avoid that continuous outer face dock that was mentioned in a previous objective that may block views of Taylor's Creek and the Rachel Carson Reserve if we had boats lined up continuously across that face dock. We also want to optimize utilization of the dock by various user groups. You know, a lot of these things I'm talking about so far, especially this one, was reflected by the original Harbor and Waterways Committee, so we want to maintain that and go a few steps further. It's basically based on the concept of services and opportunities for the many rather than the few. Maintain or increase the day boat or docking space, which came out of the first committee. Maybe even consider some dynamic pricing to offer opportunities to people that may not come to the docks during off-peak periods. Steve Bishop was saying that it was done in the past at Beaufort docks where the boaters paid substantially lower monthly rates during the summer times when the docks had open slips, and then they would move away from the docks when the docks were busier. And then we lastly wanted to maintain at least the current proportion of slips for commercial uses such as ferries, parasail, and eco tours. The next objective is Beaufort Docks is a premier destination marina on the eastern seaboard. The Harbor and Waterway Committee, they came out with the recommendation that we might want to achieve recognition as one of the top 5 transient marinas on the eastern seaboard. And this committee is recommending to kind of back away from that commitment and say that we'd like to be a premier destination marina. We kind of already are.
And we acknowledge that the attraction of Beaufort Docks, this is where we did kind of a prioritization activity, and we identified the top 4 reasons why people might want to come here, or why we want to attract more people here or maintain the number of people that are coming here. So we all agreed that location and the proximity to the ICW, proximity to a Class A inlet, the protected waters, and the location on the eastern seaboard is number 1, hands down, just one of the reasons that Beaufort Docks is outstanding. Also, the unique beauty and small town character, our in-slip fueling abilities, and hospitality and ambassadorship. Also, we could focus in the future on ease of transaction. What would it look like for making marina information easier to access, making a reservation via your smartphone? What would it look like to do payment in a different way, an easier way, adding a more convenient way to do that? And then, of course, we have proximity to maintenance, repair, and haul-out services. And the last one we added, Ted Morris suggested this one, but kind of optimize our positive community and economic impact. So, you know, putting threads out into the community. This is not just an isolated asset on the waterfront, but something that people from other communities can utilize, but also our own community can utilize. And that one is really important when we talk about going out for grants, because a lot of the grants, you know, our downtown project area is not in an underrepresented, economically depressed area, but we have some of those right around us in our community. So we'll need to make sure that the reach of that project goes out into the community so we can be eligible for funding, and we want that anyway. So that was a quick overview of those objectives. And again, we can extend this to the master plan in the future, but we needed to start small so we could begin our research groups.
Thank you, Paula. I think maybe we'll do all 3 updates and then have time for questions, if that's okay. So next we have Vic Fasolino, and we'll put his slides up there so y'all can see them. So this is the abbreviated version of the presentation that Vic gave to our committee at our September 26th meeting. So Vic, thank you so much for being here and sitting through our very long meeting. We appreciate it.
If you had to sit through it also, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Harker, and good evening, commissioners. We could just, I've got it. Look at that. Fitting in with our objectives, we need some kind of roadmap to decide what direction we are going into. And having been on the original Waterways and Advisory Committee under Doug Townsend's leadership, I think that committee did an outstanding job of going out in the community, finding out what the community wanted. We had several public charrettes. We had an online survey. We had public meetings. And from all of that data, we came up with 10 recommendations that were in the final report that went to the Board of Commissioners. These are those 10 recommendations, and I'll go through them quite briefly. The first one is replace the bulkhead immediately in front of the existing structure. So the original concrete wall at the time was thought to be deficient, and we were going to have to install another bulkhead in front of that. Replace the current boardwalk using premium materials. That fits in with the objective about having a high-class, nice dock. Modify the layout of the existing docks to facilitate the rerouting of the marine utilities. There's kind of a snaky mess out there that can get all straightened out, and have in-slip diesel fueling that's cleanly done and well-mounted and out of sight under the docks. Extend the current boardwalk east to Great and Paul Park. That's because a lot of the public comment was we should connect Great and Paul to the commercial docks. It's logical to have a boardwalk there, but there was also a significant concern that we continue to have day use for kayaks and paddle boards and things like that. But that was one of the recommendations. Construct a revenue-generating mooring field. Right now, the boats are anchoring out in the, mostly out of the channel, but sometimes in the channel. But by putting a mooring field out there, we can have better securing of those boats so they don't drift as much, and we can also raise revenue from that. Reconfigure the east basin to create a dinghy dock that will provide capacity for the mooring field. That east basin where the ferries are can get turned around a little bit, and we can put some day-use sailboats or power boats in there, help keep them off of the transient dock area and bring them down to the east end. Design and construct a new harbor center in the west end of the west parking lot. That links in with a couple other things we'll talk about. The shower house that's in use right now is pretty old and aged, and our thinking and what the public seem to feel is we should open up the view corridor so that when you drive down Turner Street, instead of seeing the public restrooms and the shower house, you actually get a view to the water. But then, of course, now you need a place to put the shower house and the restrooms. And that was the reason to build a building on the very end of the parking lot, a narrow, slender building so it doesn't obstruct the view. We could house the harbor master office in there, the shower house, and the bathhouse. I think I skipped over number 5, build a new fuel storage facility under the west parking lot. Once again, the majority of the revenue to the docks comes from fuel, so the current situation that the consignment operator has now is he's leasing the tanks from Gear Oil, and if the town had control of those tanks, it would save the dramatic lease payment as well as the potential environmental problems if those tanks are leaking. So those were the 10 recommendations. If we go to the next slide, some of these things have changed a little bit because of the work that was done by the working committee. The two biggest ones are the main bulkhead apparently does not need to be replaced. It just needs to be capped, and that's almost a $3 million savings. And the second big change was, the cost of the boardwalk. We had estimates on some of the proposals for the RFP that the cost of replacing the boardwalk was not going to be 1.9 million, but closer to 1.1 million. So the original cost of all the estimates was 14 million, and now the new revised cost comes down to 9.5 million, but we want to be cautious and conservative, so we're assuming there's going to be a 10% soft cost addition and probably 15% contingency, and that brings our total price tag up around $12 million. Now, what's going on out there right now? Because before you can decide how you're going to move forward on that plan, you have to decide, well, what's the revenue sources and how does all this fit together? So right now, the total existing linear feet of docks is 3,397. We did our boat counting for an entire year, and we know how many boats tied up and how many linear feet all those boats were. So in the high season, we tied up 381,000 feet of boats. In the low season, we tied up 141,000 feet of boats. We are guessing that the average rate per foot in high season to be $3 a foot. The current concessionaire does not have to disclose this information, so at the time, we did not know what it was. We guessed $3 a foot. Most of the marinas around here fall right in that category. The average rate per foot in low season, we estimated at $1 per foot. The fuel gallons sold, we have some pretty good statistics that indicate that they sell 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel every year. The average price, of course it goes up and down, but is typically $4.50 a foot, and typically a gas station or a marine gas station would earn $1 a gallon. If we installed the 25-ball mooring field, the typical rate for that is typically $40 a night per per boat per night. Sometimes it varies based on the length of the boat, but the average is about 40. And in the off-season, that goes down to about $30 per boat. We anchored, and this is from our boat counting, 2,817 nights of boats. So that means that boats pulled in and dropped anchor for 2,817 nights in the high season 2 years ago. And in the low season, we had 91 nights. I've included on the far margin side some of the data that came from the proposals that were in response to our RFPs. And from that data, you can see that the numbers we are using are pretty much in line with where most of the proposers thought the prices would be. So we feel pretty good about our numbers. Taking all of that data, we go to the next, and we do some calculations. So if you multiply the total dockage times those $3 per foot high season and $1 per foot low season, we come up with $1,284,000 gross revenue for dockage. Now, these are gross figures, so this is the total amount that's coming in. The mooring field for that number of nights at $40 and $30 takes in $115,000. The fuel sales, if you sell 800,000 gallons at $4.50 a gallon, is $3,600,000. And utilities sold, there's a fee for every boat that ties up and plugs in, is $80,000. So the total gross revenue to the marina in its current operating configuration is just around $5 million. But what's it cost to operate a marina? Well, so you have labor expense, and we estimated 4 persons per day in the high season and 2 persons per day in the low season. So labor is $270,000. You have to pay FICA tax on that. That's 10%, $27,000. An insurance policy for the docks is $160,000. The fuel, now this is the fuel you have to buy. You're buying 800,000 gallons and you're buying at $3.50, so you have to pay out $2,800,000 to pay for the fuel. The utilities typically are half of what you take in, so you pay out $40,000. Dock maintenance, we put in a figure of $50,000 a year, and dredging, because our current concessionaire pays to dredge, that's $60,000 a year, and the net expenses are $3,400,000. But you subtract the net expenses from the net revenue, and it seems that your net operating income is going to be somewhere around $1,673,000. The layman might call that profit, but it's not totally profit. It's net operating income, and there's one more thing we have to take into account. We have a letter from Oasis, which is also Monument, who was one of the proposers, and they said they would be tickled pink to manage our docks for 2.5% of gross revenue and 5% of net. Now, why is that important? Oh, I didn't go back. There we go. So, if they manage for 2.5% of gross, they want to generate more and more boats, more and more sales. They want the whole thing to grow. But if they get 5% of net revenue, they also have to watch their labor costs. They have to watch their expenses because they're getting paid on both ends. So it's really a good way if you choose to hire somebody to manage. In our case, 2.5% of the $5 million gross plus 5% of the $1.6 million in net comes out to $210,000. So we go back to the 1.6 million that this is grossing, and we take off another 250,000, it seems that the docks could be grossing somewheres around $1.4 million a year. Now, that depends on how the final conclusion is on how it gets managed. But that's the cash flow, and that gives you some idea of what you can do to achieve those original objectives. And this draft, well, it was based on today's usage. We've already learned since we did these slides that our current consignment operator is charging $4.10 a foot, not $3 a foot, which means another $381,000 a year just based on that one extra dollar a foot. So that's what's happening now. All of the proposers expected they could make the revenues grow by at least 3 to 4% per year. The slips are mostly empty right now, and it seems that they shouldn't be, and that's revenue that could be had. So that's where we think we are financially right now.
Thank you, Vic.
Yep.
We have one more presenter, and then we'll take questions. Thank you. And this, Dexter Matthews also sat through the whole meeting, so thank you, Dexter. He's going to give an update about our finance options.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Commissioners, good to be here tonight. And the good news about waiting to be the last speaker is the camera has left
Yes.
the room,
Yes, we saw
so I
that.
have absolutely no stress about them being over there. I'm going to give an update based upon basically my presentation that I gave at our last committee meeting, with one addition when I get to the part on appropriations that I wanted to talk about for just a minute. So what I'm going to end up giving you is really the three areas that we're looking at in the way of, or focusing in at least currently in the way of financing, and that's grants, the formation potentially of a nonprofit, maybe a 501c3, and appropriations. So I'll give you just a little bit on each one of those. But first with grants, just to give you some of the activities, I met with town staff with the interim town manager, Charlie Burgess, Elizabeth Lewis, and Christy Wood. I really wanted to get an idea with applications that had gone before on different types of grants for the town, how we have been successful and where perhaps we had not been successful. So we had a great discussion. I enjoyed the discussion with them. I got a lot of information about the infrastructure that we have in Beaufort and how we might be able to use that. I found out that there was a contract grant writer that we have currently, Margaret Shields. And so with the previous presentation, very first presentation, I mentioned that I had gone through the state website to look at grants that were available, and of the 86 grants that I found on the state website, about 21 of them looked like they had some relationship to the needs that we have at the Beaufort docks. Moffitt and Nickel also had identified some grants as well, some overlap between the two. So I asked Margaret if she would go through those, focusing in on the 21, and give us the name of the particular grant, the amount, the match that was required of the town, the dates, when submittal, when would we need to submit those grant applications, and a particular contact for the grant. So she went through all of those and submitted that in to us so we can match grants when we're applying for them with the sequence of construction that would be needed at the docks, which we're going to have to do if we're going to go after particular grants, and each one of them has their own particulars, no doubt about that. I also talked to Wendy Worley, who's a friend, and she's also Deputy Director of the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service with the Department of Environmental Quality, which many of the grants that are applicable to what we're looking at would go through that particular department, different divisions. They also have, it's interesting, they also have a position in that division that coordinates with the Department of Commerce, again on grants. So it's a good division to work with when we're looking at grants. Wendy, I will tell you, offered, if we're applying for grants through the Department of Environmental Quality, that she would definitely step in and help us, that she would work to coordinate, she would work with the particular divisions where we may have grant applications for. So that was very good. She also reached out to Commerce and talked to Kenny Flowers, who's the Assistant Secretary, and he sent her some information on the Rural Downtown Economic Development Grant Program. So we're also reviewing that. At our last meeting, because there are some other things I've been working on as well that I'll talk about in just a minute, I asked for some assistance with the grants, and Becky Bowler on our group volunteered to assist, and Commissioner Gilligan offered to volunteer to assist as well, and I'm glad, and they're doing some great work. And I think at this coming Thursday's meeting, they're going to talk about some of the work that has been done. And one of the particular items of interest is that we've reached out to some other local governments that have been very successful in their grant applications, because we want to try to mimic what they've done. We want to look at what are the efforts that they have put into going after particular grants, particular elements that we might be able to use to make sure that we're successful in our grant applications. Beyond that, I wanted to mention in talking to DEQ, and this is not on grants, but I at least wanted to mention this. I sat down while I was in Raleigh, and I'm going to talk about a few minutes the trip to Raleigh that two of us took. I talked to Vance Jackson, who used to work for me when I managed the Division of Waste Management. He's currently over the UST program. So I wanted to sit down and talk with him about our need for a permit, what we might need in the way of coming in if we move forward with having the underground storage tanks controlled by the town. So Vance was very receptive. I wanted to know how long it would take us to get a permit. He said, Dexter, unless it's complicated, we'll probably have it for you in 30 days. So if it becomes real complicated, the max probably would be 90 days. So we could turn that around pretty quick. I was glad to certainly hear that. All of the tanks currently, all the ones that are going in now are going to be double walled. They'll be very safe, monitored. The tanks that are under lease right now are monitored as well. I can tell you that. So they had to upgrade in '98. I don't believe they put in a double walled tank. They probably went in and sealed the particular tank that's down there that the town is currently using, or at least our contractor is currently using. But Vance said he would do whatever he could to assist us in gaining the permit, and he even volunteered to come down. The final inspection has to be done when tanks go in. He volunteered to come down and take a look at the tanks himself. So I thought that was pretty good for him to do that. So far as a nonprofit 501c3, currently Craig Sosa, who's on our committee, is working with a couple of local folks and looking at the formation of a 501c3, so we would have that in place for private donations, which again could be an area that we could have funding for the docks. I mean, we have plenty of examples around here. Friends of the museum, I mean, they do a fantastic job, and we could put something in place perhaps and have private donations as well to assist us. And then finally, I wanted to update you on appropriations. I mentioned a trip to Raleigh. On September 25th, Craig Sosa and I both went to Raleigh to meet with some potential lobbyists, if we needed a lobbyist. And quite frankly, I had said going into this, we're going to need a lobbyist to go after an appropriation. However, I may change that just a little bit based upon the meetings that we had. He has contacts and I have contacts with a number of lobbyists in Raleigh. We talked to two that we are both very, very comfortable with, that do a fantastic job. Both of those were very positive about the potential of Beaufort being able to gain an appropriation. I will also say that both offered to work with us without a fee, which is good news. Like I said, they know me, they know Craig, and they feel very comfortable giving us advice and kind of keeping up with what's going on if we move forward with an appropriation attempt in the next legislative session. We talked to one other firm, I think, that has talked to some of the town folks, I think maybe the mayor and Commissioner Oliver, and they offered to do it for less than they would normally charge as well. But the two that I'm talking about, I think are very influential, could do a good job. And so at this point, my recommendation, at the committee meeting was that we not make a recommendation to you to hire a lobbyist at the moment. Now, that may change as we move along, but given the fact of who we have that will work with us, I feel pretty confident to move forward without a paid lobbyist, a contract lobbyist, for the moment at least. Beyond that, I know that we have reached out, the mayor has reached out to the county. We want to make sure that the county's on board. They're aware of what we're doing in the way of seeking an appropriation. It's very important that occur, and so I appreciate the mayor reaching out to the county on that particular point. On October 4th, there was a breakfast that was put together that Commissioner Oliver put together for us to have the opportunity, myself and the mayor, to meet not only with our delegation, but with a number of other legislators that were in town for fundraising activities. So he asked them if they would meet with us and hear what was going on about the docks. It was a great way to have an introduction. I appreciate his setting that up. And I'll tell you, we ended up with Representative Tyson. Representative Hall came in virtually. He's in the western part of the state, so obviously he was occupied. So to be honest, I was totally surprised that he listened in, but he did. Representative Harrison, Representative Dixon, Representative Jones, and Representative Cairns was there, as well as Senator Sanderson. I thought the meeting went extremely well. They were very receptive to helping Beaufort. I will say that obviously we've had a major storm to come through North Carolina in the western part of the state. Does that make it more difficult? I think it does. I think it will have an impact in the way of gaining an appropriation. However, I still feel very positive about moving forward and attempting to gain an appropriation in the next session. The General Assembly is currently in session. They just gave an appropriation. There'll be others, no doubt about it. I complimented the members that were there on their ability in the way of the current budget and in what's known commonly as the rainy day fund that assist in events like we had out in the western part of the state. Currently, there's somewhere around $5 billion in that fund. I mean, they've done an excellent job with their budget, and so I complimented them on that. We also did a tour of the docks while they were here, so that they could basically put their hands on it to see what was needed by Beaufort in the way of those docks. We talked about the process of getting here. The committee that had done so much work before the committee that I'm on, what our current charge is from the mayor, the activities that we had, and ultimately the need. And we used, I know you just saw the figures, we used a figure for somewhere around 15 million. I still think that's probably somewhere that will end up maybe a little closer to that. Obviously, as you do construction work, the costs always increase over time, so I think we may end up with a figure around that time. So I think with that I'll end, because I know we want to leave time for any questions that you may have. I will say I agree we have tremendous ability on well beyond my expertise on the committee. I look forward to the recommendations that we will bring to you, and certainly I encourage you to be open and support the decisions, or at least the recommendations that come back to you in hopefully a short period of time. I'll end there.
Thank you, Dexter. That is all we have for updates, so we can take any questions that y'all have. Paula, Vic, Dexter, myself.
Commissioner Oliver?
No questions.
Commissioner Cooper?
None.
Guess you have no questions. Commissioner LoPiccolo?
Yeah, I do have some questions. So on Mr. Fasolino's presentation, this may actually be more for Mr. Matthews. There was no line item for payment of, say, a loan or a grant or so forth for that. So are we basically looking at this as we will be looking for the entire funding to come from money that's made from appropriations, donations, or grants that are not repayments of of monies. Is that how we're looking at this? I didn't see any deduction for payment of money, a cost of funds.
The cost share, for instance, the match that's required for grants, is that what you're asking about?
Will that, or if there's any repayment of funds? If we're basically taking a loan out for, or a grant out for $10 million.
Right.
How is that then factored in and what cost that would be?
Many grants have a match that's required of the applicant if you're successful. So far as repayment, we're not looking at a single grant that there's repayment on, at least not. I haven't identified one unless someone else has identified one, or I hear something from any of our other members. We're going after grants that we would receive the entire grant amount. There may be a match, there may be a 10% or 20% match, whatever, that the town would have to come up with. Have we identified those specific funds? No, but also if there's a 501c3 and those funds become available, that's an option. I certainly am not familiar with the town's budget, but I would imagine there may be some, and I'm looking at the mayor, there may be some funds there that could be used as a match. The funds have come from somewhere, I guess, with grants that have been, applied for in the past. So I assume there may be some funding there as well that would be available, for grants that would be applied for before we may have funds that would be coming in from a 501c3. Is that?
I understand. And now I see how you're trying to obtain the money. I wasn't sure if we were looking at other items, as First Trine had previously discussed other entities and ways of leveraging property and so forth to try to obtain some of the monies and funding.
Right.
I didn't see any deductions on our top line.
No, and the appropriation, again, is not something we would be going after to pay back.
Right.
And I pointed out to the members that came to the meeting, we're not asking for something that hasn't been done in the past. There was $10 million that was given to a number of local governments in the northeastern part of the state for exactly what we're asking for.
Okay. And were you given any hint of timeline or, or even ability to attain that success rate for something like this? Any sentiment regarding how that would play out?
I have. I can tell you this, as far as an appropriation is concerned, if we're going into the long session for an appropriation, they come back into session in January. The Senate will take up their budget. Well, the governor will whoever's governor will submit a budget in. The General Assembly then will adopt their own budget. I mean, the Senate starts next time, so we want the appropriation language to be in that Senate budget that's adopted. So hopefully we can have that done with our member from here. You've got to have your delegation definitely supporting that, and that's the reason we need the town supporting that. The budget would then go over to the House. The House, we want to make sure that provision remains on the House side as well. That way there's not a difference between the House and the Senate. If there is a difference, it's in one side and not on the other, you have conferees, and they take it up. You've got a chance that it may not come out with it in it. So it's very important that it go in on both sides. If we make it through all of that and it's in the budget, I would guess that we would see a budget maybe in September of next year. They really need it by July 1st. It's a 2-year budget. Budget ends July 1st, so their target will be to have a budget July 1st. But a lot of times, it's a little later than that before they have a budget. So for an appropriation, that's my answer. For a grant, they're all over the place. And that's the reason we're currently doing basically what you're asking. We're looking at the times, when the money would come in, and how that would need to be sequenced with the work that would be done. But I'll also answer this question because Commissioner Oliver has asked me several times, do you have a timeline like that, when you would receive the money and so forth? I mean, it's a good question. What I can tell you with 100% certainty, if we don't try to obtain a appropriation, if we don't apply for the grants, I can with 100% certainty tell you we will not get any money out of those two pots. I think we've got a really good shot at an appropriation. I think we have an excellent shot at some grant money at this point. But can I give you an exact, 70% chance, 90% chance, I can't do that. I don't think
And you
anybody
said the
could.
grants would probably be matching grants for the town,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
And
Some
hopefully-
percentage, not
right.
50/50, some may be, but most of them are less.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Vic,
thank
did you want to add something to that too? Sure. Thank you, Dexter.
I think you were referring to the numbers, Commissioner LaPiccolo, that you were referring to the numbers that I had up there. That is simply the income stream. There's no debt service in there because you're probably asking the question a month ahead of our getting to the answer. We don't know how this is going to get financed yet. Obviously, there's a complex puzzle there, and depending on the amount of grants or the amount of appropriation, it could come out of that 1.4 million net. Just statistically, though, the interest on $10 million at 5% is $500,000 a year.
So stay tuned for our next meeting on Thursday, right, Vic?
I'm sorry?
I said stay tuned. We have some more information to be shared on Thursday at our committee
Yes.
meeting. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But those are good questions. Thank you, John.
Any further questions? All right, well, thank you for an excellent presentation. You guys just gave me goosebumps, actually, after the last meeting. We were coming up with a design and something that I've been, hoping to see come through a lot sooner than this. So you're making a lot of gains and headways, but you've also had a very good start with the Harbor and Waterways Committee's document, so I call that the Bible. Sarah and Paula, you're doing an amazing job leading this team. I want to thank you for your efforts and picking, you hired to fit, I want to say. And everybody's doing an amazing job. I may not be at the meeting on Thursday, but I'll be there in spirit, and I know you've got it taken from here, and I think you've been shown a lot of support. You've got more attendance at their meeting than we do sometimes here at our meeting, so I'm kind of jealous on that, but, but good information nonetheless. So let's move on to manager's report.
Just going to talk with you about one item tonight, an item I think is of some interest to you. Town engineer Sam Bell this past week received the draft report of the Professional Park Drive Stormwater Study. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule in that regard, but we anticipate the finalized document will be available into November, first part of December. So we'll be ready to brief you on that and move forward with bringing the affected folks out in the professional park in the study area up to speed on what that study says.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Any questions you have on that item or
Commissioner?
anything else?
Commissioner Spiegler?
No questions.
Commissioner Oliver?
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Cooper?
No, none.
Okay. Commissioner Gilligan?
No questions.
Commissioner Lo Piccolo?
No questions.
All righty.
Thank you.
And you did mention about putting together some meetings for the
Yes.
residents that are out there, and we're
Yes,
still on
yes.
task with that?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
very good. All right, now we're going to move on to mayor and commissioner comments. Commissioner Spiegler?
I just want to say thank you to everybody who's attending in person and online. Really appreciate everyone's efforts and was really glad to see the UDO report today. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Oliver?
A couple quick things, if I could. I would like to see us, whenever you can, Charlie, get as much data by month from our parking company, who I think gathers that data every day, and in much detail as we could, where the cars are coming from, what the occupancy rates have been, what it looks like per month basis, all of the intellectual data that they gather. I'd like to see us get that to the commissioners and to the community. I don't know how to, as a commissioner, how we can do any more than we talked about in the UDA outreach effort than was talked about tonight. But I just can't help but think that that's going to be, in this environment with what we're doing now and what's going on in the world, how we transmit that to our community and gather information, I can't think of any greater priority right now. And last, I know very well that many of us in our community know Susan Sanders, but I'd like to offer a prayer for her tonight. She's fighting a miserable fight, and we all know her, and we all love her. I often say she's the toughest 90 pounds that we've got in the town of Beaufort. And she is in the hospital tonight, suffering pain, which she doesn't deserve. So I'd like to all of us to think about her and put her in our prayers tonight. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper?
Yes, thank all of those who are out here tonight as well as on Zoom. We're 14 days into Breast Cancer Month. Just want to make that announcement. And early voting start this Thursday. It is important that I don't care who you vote for, but vote. It's important.
Thank you. Commissioner Gillikin?
I don't have any comments this evening.
Thank you. Commissioner Lopiccolo?
Prayers and thoughts out to Susan Sanders as well. And I just want to say it's been great seeing everyone out and about in town. The weather's been great. We've had some really good events in town. It's a delight actually to see the skydivers in town. And I think that was a great event. Hopefully they'll consider us again next year. Saw a lot of people out at the restaurants in town and intermingling with the folks in our community. So hopefully we can see that happen again. So enjoyed it and echo Melvin's sentiment, get out and vote.
Well, thank you. The skydiving event is every 2 years, and would like to see them come back. They thoroughly enjoyed themselves, so want to thank the organizers who actually put Michael J. Smith on their radar so that they could come here. So that was a very concerted effort, because many of you know they had to pivot from their original plan, but they really enjoyed it here. The hospitality by our community was like no other, and something I knew that they would enjoy. So hopefully they will pick us again, but I don't know. But we did have a good time with them here. Want to thank the commissioners for doing the hard work, reading your materials, coming prepared. I know this was a very long meeting, but you provided the great feedback that will allow for the town to move forward. Want to thank the citizens that were here and hung in as long as you could, and hopefully there's still some people online. Jason? Very good. Good for hanging in there. Thank the staff for all that you do for our town. And I also want to send a shout out to the staff that were deployed to help those in need in the western part of the county. We had several staff members that were actually sent to help those in distress, and want to thank you for doing just that. So without further ado, I would like to get a motion. We are going to go into recess and meet tomorrow, October the 15th at 5 p.m. right here. This will be a closed session to discuss personnel matter. So I just want to have a motion to recess this meeting until October the 15th at 5 p.m.
So move.
Got a motion to recess? Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much.